Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a story that proves sometimes the quietest move is the most devastating one. I'll be playing some relaxing Minecraft in the background while we unpack this absolute masterclass in patience and timing. Before we jump in, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting this channel. Truly, thank you. Your energy is what keeps this community going. This story starts with a wedding that should have been the beginning of something beautiful, but instead became a masterclass in patience and perfectly timed revenge. So let's dive into how one person turned their in-laws' own weapon against them. When I married Jake, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest person alive. Not just because I was marrying someone I loved, but because I thought I was gaining this warm, welcoming family that actually wanted me around. His mother hugged me at our engagement party and told me she'd always wanted a daughter. His two sisters immediately added me to their group chats and started planning girls' trips. For the first few months of our marriage, everything felt like a dream. Then the small things started. It began with conversations that would abruptly end the moment I walked into a room. I'd come downstairs during a family dinner at their house, and suddenly everyone would go quiet, then quickly pivot to some obviously fake topic about the weather or grocery shopping. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe they were talking about something private that had nothing to do with me. But then the texts started coming through to our family group chat. Little messages clearly meant for somewhere else. One from Jake's sister Michelle said something like, "She's so sensitive, I can't say anything without her taking it the wrong way." Another from his mum said, "I'm worried about Jake, he seems stressed lately." They'd always follow up quickly with, "Oops, wrong chat," but the damage was done. I'd see them and I'd feel this knot forming in my stomach. The thing is, I really tried. I bent over backwards to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I showed up early to help with holiday dinners. I remembered everyone's birthdays. I sent thoughtful gifts. I laughed at his dad's bad jokes. But nothing seemed to work. If anything, they seemed to get colder. Then Michelle started organizing these family events and specifically calling them family-only nights. She'd invite Jake but make it crystal clear I wasn't included. Jake thought it was weird but didn't push back hard enough. He'd say things like, "They probably just want some sibling time," and I'd nod and pretend it didn't sting. But it did. Every single time. I started noticing Jake pulling away from me too. Not in any obvious way, but in these small moments. He'd seem distant after phone calls with his mom. He'd get defensive when I'd bring up feeling excluded. He started questioning little things I did, things he'd never cared about before, like if I wanted to hang out with my friends on a Saturday, suddenly he'd act like I was abandoning him. This is where it gets absurd. 6 months into our marriage, his family staged what I can only describe as an intervention. I came home from work one day to find Jake sitting on our couch with his mother, both sisters, and his dad all gathered in our living room. They'd let themselves in with Jake's key. My heart dropped into my stomach. His mother started talking in this overly sweet, concerned voice about how they'd all noticed changes in Jake, how he seemed isolated, how he wasn't spending as much time with family, how I seemed to get upset whenever they tried to include him in family plans. Michelle jumped in with examples of times I'd apparently been rude or standoffish, most of which were either completely made up or wildly exaggerated. Then came the kicker. His mom pulled out a printed list of therapists who specialize in helping couples navigate difficult family dynamics. She slid it across the coffee table toward us, like she was doing us this huge favor. She said they were worried Jake had made a mistake rushing into marriage, and that maybe we needed professional help before things got worse. I just sat there, stunned. Jake looked uncomfortable, but he wasn't defending me. He wasn't shutting this down. He was just sitting there, letting his family dismantle our marriage right in front of me. I'll be honest, I almost broke in that moment. I almost started crying and apologizing for things I didn't even do. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger, maybe it was just pure survival instinct. I excused myself, said I needed a minute, and went upstairs. I sat on our bed trying not to hyperventilate, and that's when I saw Jake's iPad on the nightstand. He'd left it unlocked. The screen was still lit up from whatever he'd been looking at earlier, and right there on the screen was a group chat I'd never seen before. It was called Family First. My hands were shaking as I opened it, And what I found made my blood run cold. Months of messages, months of coordinated, calculated planning. His mother had started the chat the week after our wedding. The first message was something like, "We need to be careful here. If we push too hard too fast, Jake will defend her. We need to be subtle." They had scripts, actual drafted scripts for conversations they were planning to have with Jake. Things like, "I'm worried about you. You seem different lately. Is everything okay at home?" And "I miss the old Jake, the one who always made time for family." There were screenshots of fake therapist recommendations they'd pulled from random websites, formatted to look like personal referrals. There were messages about how to make me look bad without being too obvious about it, how to exclude me from events in a way that seemed natural, how to plant seeds of doubt in Jake's mind about whether he'd made the right choice. Michelle had written, "The goal is to make her isolate herself. If we push her away enough, she'll stop trying, and then Jake will see she never really cared about being part of this family." His mom had replied, "Exactly, and when she stops trying, we swoop in with concern. We never attack her directly. We just express worry about Jake." I felt sick. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me being oversensitive. This was a coordinated campaign to destroy my marriage from the inside out. But that wasn't even the worst part. I kept scrolling and found messages from just a few days ago, planning today's intervention. They'd rehearsed who would say what. They'd planned the timing for when I'd be at work so they could talk to Jake alone first and get him in the right headspace. They'd even discussed how to make sure I felt ambushed and defensive when I got home. One message from his dad, who'd barely said 2 words during the actual intervention, read, "If she gets emotional, that actually helps us. Shows Jake she's unstable." I sat there for probably 20 minutes just reading, just absorbing the fact that these people had spent half a year actively trying to end my marriage. And the worst part was that it was working. Jake was starting to believe them. I thought about confronting them right then and there, but I knew how that would go. They'd deny everything. They'd say I was violating privacy by reading their messages. They'd twist it into more proof that I was the problem. So I didn't say anything. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every script, every manipulative strategy they'd planned. I sent them all to my own phone and deleted the evidence that I'd done it. Then I went back downstairs, apologized for getting emotional, and said I'd think about the therapist recommendations. They smiled, they hugged Jake, they told him they just wanted what was best for him, and then they left. Jake tried to talk to me about it that night, but I shut it down. I said I was tired and needed to process. He seemed relieved not to have to deal with it. The next few weeks were torture. I had to pretend everything was fine while watching them continue their campaign. More family-only events, more concerned phone calls to Jake, more little digs disguised as worry. But I had a plan. Jake's mother's 60th birthday was coming up. Big party, fancy venue, everyone who mattered to her would be there. Extended family, friends, colleagues. She'd been planning it for months. I volunteered to help with the setup. I showed up early, was sweet and helpful, made sure the decorations looked perfect. And when I was alone in the venue's control room, where they managed the sound system for speeches and music, I uploaded a file to the computer. The party started, everyone arrived, there were speeches and toasts. Jake's dad gave this long, heartfelt speech about what an amazing wife and mother she was, how she always put family first, how lucky they all were to have her. Then it was time for the slideshow. I'd helped put it together so everyone trusted it was just going to be old family photos and sweet memories. The first few slides were exactly that. Baby photos, wedding pictures, family vacations. Everyone was smiling and laughing. Then the screen changed. Screenshots of their group chat filled the projection screen. Message after message, their carefully crafted scripts, their strategies for making me look unstable, their goal of ending my marriage, everything. The room went completely silent. You could hear people's breathing. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. I'd set it to scroll slowly, giving everyone time to read. To really absorb what they were seeing. Jake's face went white. His mother stood up trying to stop it, but she couldn't figure out how to shut down the system. The messages just kept coming. The finale was a message from his mother from just 2 days before the party. Someone had asked if they felt bad about what they were doing. Her response was on the screen for everyone to read. "No, Jake deserves better than her. This is for his own good. Sometimes you have to save your children from their own mistakes. When the slideshow finally ended, I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said very calmly, "I hope you all enjoyed the show. Happy birthday." Then I walked out. The fallout was nuclear. Extended family members who'd been at the party started calling Jake, asking what the hell was going on. Friends were texting his mother asking if those messages were real. His sisters tried to claim I'd faked everything, but the timestamps and the details were too specific, too real. Jake came home that night and didn't say a word. He just sat on the couch staring at nothing. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe he'd still choose them over me. But then he started crying. He said he'd been so stupid. He said he'd felt something was off but convinced himself he was imagining it. He said reading those messages, seeing it all laid out like that, he finally understood what they'd been doing. Not just to me, but to him. They'd been manipulating him, using his love for them as a weapon. He called his mother the next day and told her he was done. Not just taking a break, but completely done with all of them until they could acknowledge what they'd done and genuinely apologize. She tried to justify it, said they were just looking out for him, that I'd clearly manipulated him if he was choosing me over family. That's when Jake said the thing that still makes me love him. He said, "She is my family. You're just people who happen to share my DNA and think that gives you the right to destroy my life." Then he hung up. His sisters tried reaching out, tried to smooth things over, but Jake blocked their numbers. He filed what he jokingly called a divorce from his family's influence over his life. We went to actual therapy, the kind where the therapist wasn't a printed recommendation from a manipulative group chat. We worked through the damage they'd caused. We rebuilt trust. And exactly 1 month after his mother's birthday party, we eloped. Just us, 2 witnesses we barely knew, and an officiant. We renewed our vows on our own terms, without anyone trying to sabotage it. We sent his family a photo afterward, not to be cruel, but to make it clear we were moving forward with or without their approval. They never apologized. Not really. His mother sent a card months later saying she hoped we could move past this misunderstanding someday. A misunderstanding. Like 6 months of coordinated psychological warfare was just a little communication breakdown. We didn't respond. Jake still struggles sometimes. He'll see something that reminds him of a good memory with his family, and I can see it on his face, this mix of grief and anger. But he never wavers. He knows what they did. He knows what they're capable of. As for me, I learned something important. Sometimes the quietest revenge is just letting people expose themselves. I didn't have to yell or argue or defend myself. I just had to give everyone else the same information I had and let them draw their own conclusions. His family wanted to make me look unstable. Instead, they showed everyone exactly who they really were. And honestly, I couldn't have planned it better myself. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, speaking of families hiding things, let me tell you about a secret that makes in-law scheming look amateur. I grew up adoring my older sister Emma. She was 17 years older than me, which meant she was less like a sibling and more like this impossibly cool aunt figure who existed somewhere between family and friend. She'd sneak me candy when our parents weren't looking, cover for me when I stayed out past curfew in high school, give me advice about boys and school and life that actually made sense. She was the person I went to when I needed someone who got it. Our parents were strict, like really strict, the kind of religious household where every rule had a Bible verse attached to it and questioning anything was considered disrespectful. They were especially tense around Emma, always had been for as long as I could remember. There was this weird energy whenever she was in the room, like everyone was walking on eggshells, but nobody would explain why. I just figured they were harder on her because she was the oldest, or maybe because she'd been rebellious as a teenager. They'd make these little comments sometimes, passive-aggressive digs about responsibility and consequences that I never fully understood. Emma moved out when I was 6, got her own apartment across town. She'd visit for holidays and birthdays, always bringing presents and hugs and this sadness in her eyes that I was too young to recognize. As I got older, I noticed she'd watch me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not jealousy exactly, but something close to grief, like she was mourning something she'd lost. I turned 23 last November. Emma came over for Thanksgiving like she always did, helped with the cooking, made small talk with our parents that felt performative and strained. After dinner, she started drinking. Not unusual, everyone had wine with Thanksgiving, but she kept going. Glass after glass while our parents exchanged looks, and I tried to lighten the mood with stories from my new job. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, but full body sobs that came out of nowhere and wouldn't stop. Our parents immediately tried to shut it down, told her she'd had too much to drink and should go lie down. But Emma shook her head and looked right at me with tears streaming down her face and said something I'll never forget. She said she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't keep pretending. Our mother went pale. Our father stood up and said they should talk about this privately. But Emma ignored them both and kept staring at me with this desperate, broken expression. She kept apologizing, saying she was sorry for everything they made her do, sorry for all the years of lying, sorry for not being strong enough to tell me sooner. I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what she meant, tried to get her to explain, and that's when our mother cut in, voice sharp and cold, told Emma she was drunk and embarrassing herself, told her to stop this right now before she ruined everything. The way she said it made my stomach drop, because whatever this was, it was big, and our parents had been hiding it my entire life. I pressed Emma harder, asked her directly what was going on. She looked at our parents, then back at me, and the words that came out of her mouth changed everything. I'm not your sister. I'm your mother. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my mom, or the woman I thought was my mom, taking this sharp, horrified breath. Emma started explaining through tears. She'd gotten pregnant at 15. Some boy from school, a relationship our parents had forbidden. A stupid teenage mistake that happened once and derailed her entire life. When our parents found out, they were mortified. Not concerned, not supportive, just mortified. The shame of it, what people at church would say, how it would destroy their reputation in the community. So they came up with a plan. Emma would hide the pregnancy, stay home from school claiming illness. And when the baby came, when I came, they'd raise me as their own. Tell everyone they'd decided to have another child later in life. Emma would go back to school, go back to normal, and nobody would ever know. Except Emma would know. She'd have to live with it every single day. They took me from her when I was born, made her sign papers, made her promise never to tell, threatened to cut her off completely if she ever tried to claim me. She was 15 years old and terrified and had no idea what else to do. So she agreed, and then she had to watch as they raised me, as I called them mum and dad, as I grew up thinking she was just my sister. She couldn't hold me the way she wanted to, couldn't comfort me when I was scared, couldn't be there for milestones and moments in the way a mother should be. She had to love me from a distance, had to pretend her own child was her sibling, had to swallow that grief for 23 years. I looked at our parents, or my grandparents, I guess, trying to process what I was hearing, asked if it was true. They didn't deny it, just sat there looking cornered and defensive. And finally, my father said they'd done what was best for everyone involved. Best for everyone. As if stealing Emma's baby and forcing her into 2 decades of silence was somehow a kindness. I asked Emma why she never told me. She said she wanted to, 1,000 times, but they'd made it clear that if she ever revealed the truth, she'd lose me completely. They'd make sure of it. And she'd been a terrified teenager who didn't know her rights, didn't have resources, didn't have anyone on her side. So she'd stayed quiet and tried to be the best sister she could be, even though every time I called her Emma instead of Mum, it broke something inside her. And here's where it gets absurd. My father actually tried to justify it, said they'd given me a good life, a stable home, opportunities Emma couldn't have provided at 15. Said Emma should be grateful they'd stepped in, that they'd saved her from ruining her future. Like raising your own child is ruining your future. Like loving your baby is something to be saved from. My mother chimed in, said this was ancient history that didn't need to be brought up now, that Emma was being selfish, that I was happy and well-adjusted, and this revelation would only cause unnecessary pain. Unnecessary pain. As if the pain they'd caused Emma for 23 years was somehow necessary and acceptable. I couldn't stay in that house another second. I packed a bag and went to a friend's place that night. Just needed space to breathe and think. Emma texted me around midnight, apologizing for dropping this on me, saying she'd understand if I needed time. But I didn't need time away from her. I needed time away from the people who'd orchestrated this whole mess. We met for coffee the next day. She told me everything about my biological father, some kid who moved away junior year and never knew she was pregnant, about the pregnancy itself, hiding it under baggy clothes, being terrified and alone, about giving birth and having them immediately take me, barely letting her hold me before whisking me away to the nursery. She'd kept things over the years, pictures of her pregnant, though you could barely tell, notes she'd written to me on my birthdays that she never gave me, a box of memories she'd been too afraid to share but couldn't bring herself to throw away. The person sitting across from me wasn't my cool older sister anymore. She was my mother. She'd been my mother the whole time, and I'd never known. I moved in with Emma 2 weeks later, told my parents, my grandparents, whatever they were now, that I needed space. That's putting it mildly. What I actually needed was to completely rebuild my understanding of my own identity. We're trying to figure out this mother-daughter thing now. It's strange and painful and beautiful all at once. Emma doesn't expect me to suddenly start. When I married Jake, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest person alive. Not just because I was marrying someone I loved, but because I thought I was gaining this warm, welcoming family that actually wanted me around. His mother hugged me at our engagement party and told me she'd always wanted a daughter. His two sisters immediately added me to their group chats and started planning girls' trips. For the first few months of our marriage, everything felt like a dream. Then the small things started. It began with conversations that would abruptly end the moment I walked into a room. I'd come downstairs during a family dinner at their house, and suddenly everyone would go quiet, then quickly pivot to some obviously fake topic about the weather or grocery shopping. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe they were talking about something private that had nothing to do with me. But then the text started coming through to our family group chat. Little messages clearly meant for somewhere else. One from Jake's sister Michelle said something like, "She's so sensitive, I can't say anything without her taking it the wrong way." Another from his mum said, "I'm worried about Jake, he seems stressed lately." They'd always follow up quickly with, "Oops, wrong chat," but the damage was done. I'd see them and I'd feel this knot forming in my stomach. The thing is, I really tried. I bent over backwards to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I showed up early to help with holiday dinners. I remembered everyone's birthdays. I sent thoughtful gifts. I laughed at his dad's bad jokes. But nothing seemed to work. If anything, they seemed to get colder. Then Michelle started organizing these family events and specifically calling them family-only nights. She'd invite Jake but make it crystal clear I wasn't included. Jake thought it was weird but didn't push back hard enough. He'd say things like, "They probably just want some sibling time," and I'd nod and pretend it didn't sting. But it did. Every single time. I started noticing Jake pulling away from me too. Not in any obvious way, but in these small moments. He'd seem distant after phone calls with his mom. He'd get defensive when I'd bring up feeling excluded. He started questioning little things I did, things he'd never cared about before, like if I wanted to hang out with my friends on a Saturday, suddenly he'd act like I was abandoning him. This is where it gets absurd. 6 months into our marriage, his family staged what I can only describe as an intervention. I came home from work one day to find Jake sitting on our couch with his mother, both sisters, and his dad all gathered in our living room. They'd let themselves in with Jake's key. My heart dropped into my stomach. His mother started talking in this overly sweet, concerned voice about how they'd all noticed changes in Jake, how he seemed isolated, how he wasn't spending as much time with family, how I seemed to get upset whenever they tried to include him in family plans. Michelle jumped in with examples of times I'd apparently been rude or standoffish, most of which were either completely made up or wildly exaggerated. Then came the kicker. His mum pulled out a printed list of therapists who specialize in helping couples navigate difficult family dynamics. She slid it across the coffee table toward us, like she was doing us this huge favor. She said they were worried Jake had made a mistake rushing into marriage, and that maybe we needed professional help before things got worse. I just sat there, stunned. Jake looked uncomfortable, but he wasn't defending me. He wasn't shutting this down. He was just sitting there, letting his family dismantle our marriage right in front of me. I'll be honest, I almost broke in that moment. I almost started crying and apologizing for things I didn't even do. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger, maybe it was just pure survival instinct. I excused myself, said I needed a minute, and went upstairs. I sat on our bed trying not to hyperventilate, and that's when I saw Jake's iPad on the nightstand. He'd left it unlocked. The screen was still lit up from whatever he'd been looking at earlier, and right there on the screen was a group chat I'd never seen before. It was called Family First. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and what I found made my blood run cold. Months of messages, months of coordinated, calculated planning. His mother had started the chat the week after our wedding. The first message was something like, "We need to be careful here. If we push too hard too fast, Jake will defend her. We need to be subtle." They had scripts, actual drafted scripts for conversations they were planning to have with Jake. Things like, "I'm worried about you. You seem different lately. Is everything okay at home?" And, "I miss the old Jake, the one who always made time for family." There were screenshots of fake therapist recommendations they'd pulled from random websites, formatted to look like personal referrals. There were messages about how to make me look bad without being too obvious about it, how to exclude me from events in a way that seemed natural, how to plant seeds of doubt in Jake's mind about whether he'd made the right choice. Michelle had written, "The goal is to make her isolate herself. If we push her away enough, she'll stop trying, and then Jake will see she never really cared about being part of this family." His mom had replied, "Exactly, and when she stops trying, we swoop in with concern. We never attack her directly. We just express worry about Jake." I felt sick. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me being oversensitive. This was a coordinated campaign to destroy my marriage from the inside out. But that wasn't even the worst part. I kept scrolling and found messages from just a few days ago, planning today's intervention. They'd rehearsed who would say what. They'd planned the timing for when I'd be at work so they could talk to Jake alone first and get him in the right headspace. They'd even discussed how to make sure I felt ambushed and defensive when I got home. One message from his dad, who'd barely said 2 words during the actual intervention, read, "If she gets emotional, that actually helps us. Shows Jake she's unstable." I sat there for probably 20 minutes just reading, just absorbing the fact that these people had spent half a year actively trying to end my marriage. And the worst part was that it was working. Jake was starting to believe them. I thought about confronting them right then and there, but I knew how that would go. They'd deny everything. They'd say I was violating privacy by reading their messages. They'd twist it into more proof that I was the problem. So I didn't say anything. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every script, every manipulative strategy they'd planned. I sent them all to my own phone and deleted the evidence that I'd done it. Then I went back downstairs, apologized for getting emotional, and said I'd think about the therapist recommendations. They smiled, they hugged Jake, they told him they just wanted what was best for him, and then they left. Jake tried to talk to me about it that night, but I shut it down. I said I was tired and needed to process. He seemed relieved not to have to deal with it. The next few weeks were torture. I had to pretend everything was fine while watching them continue their campaign. More family-only events, more concerned phone calls to Jake, more little digs disguised as worry. But I had a plan. Jake's mother's 60th birthday was coming up. Big party, fancy venue, everyone who mattered to her would be there. Extended family, friends, colleagues. She'd been planning it for months. I volunteered to help with the setup. I showed up early, was sweet and helpful, made sure the decorations looked perfect. And when I was alone in the venue's control room, where they managed the sound system for speeches and music, I uploaded a file to the computer. The party started, everyone arrived, there were speeches and toasts. Jake's dad gave this long, heartfelt speech about what an amazing wife and mother she was, how she always put family first, how lucky they all were to have her. Then it was time for the slideshow. I'd helped put it together so everyone trusted it was just going to be old family photos and sweet memories. The first few slides were exactly that. Baby photos, wedding pictures, family vacations. Everyone was smiling and laughing. Then the screen changed. Screenshots of their group chat filled the projection screen. Message after message, their carefully crafted scripts, their strategies for making me look unstable, their goal of ending my marriage, everything. The room went completely silent. You could hear people's breathing. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. I'd set it to scroll slowly, giving everyone time to read, to really absorb what they were seeing. Jake's face went white. His mother stood up trying to stop it, but she couldn't figure out how to shut down the system. The messages just kept coming. The finale was a message from his mother from just 2 days before the party. Someone had asked if they felt bad about what they were doing. Her response was on the screen for everyone to read. No, Jake deserves better than her. This is for his own good. Sometimes you have to save your children from their own mistakes. When the slideshow finally ended, I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said very calmly, "I hope you all enjoyed the show. Happy birthday." Then I walked out. The fallout was nuclear. Extended family members who'd been at the party started calling Jake, asking what the hell was going on. Friends were texting his mother asking if those messages were real. His sisters tried to claim I'd faked everything, but the timestamps and the details were too specific, too real. Jake came home that night and didn't say a word. He just sat on the couch staring at nothing. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe he'd still choose them over me. But then he started crying. He said he'd been so stupid. He said he'd felt something was off but convinced himself he was imagining it. He said reading those messages, seeing it all laid out like that, he finally understood what they'd been doing. Not just to me, but to him. They'd been manipulating him, using his love for them as a weapon. He called his mother the next day and told her he was done. Not just taking a break, but completely done with all of them until they could acknowledge what they'd done and genuinely apologize. She tried to justify it, said they were just looking out for him, that I'd clearly manipulated him if he was choosing me over family. That's when Jake said the thing that still makes me love him. He said, "She is my family. You're just people who happen to share my DNA and think that gives you the right to destroy my life." Then he hung up. His sisters tried reaching out, tried to smooth things over, but Jake blocked their numbers. He filed what he jokingly called a divorce from his family's influence over his life. We went to actual therapy, the kind where the therapist wasn't a printed recommendation from a manipulative group chat. We worked through the damage they'd caused. We rebuilt trust. And exactly 1 month after his mother's birthday party, we eloped. Just us, 2 witnesses we barely knew, and an officiant. We renewed our vows on our own terms, without anyone trying to sabotage it. We sent his family a photo afterward, not to be cruel, but to make it clear we were moving forward with or without their approval. They never apologized. Not really. His mother sent a card months later saying she hoped we could move past this misunderstanding someday. A misunderstanding. Like 6 months of coordinated psychological warfare was just a little communication breakdown. We didn't respond. Jake still struggles sometimes. He'll see something that reminds him of a good memory with his family, and I can see it on his face, this mix of grief and anger. But he never wavers. He knows what they did. He knows what they're capable of. As for me, I learned something important. Sometimes the quietest revenge is just letting people expose themselves. I didn't have to yell or argue or defend myself. I just had to give everyone else the same information I had and let them draw their own conclusions. His family wanted to make me look unstable. Instead, they showed everyone exactly who they really were. And honestly, I couldn't have planned it better myself. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, speaking of families hiding things, let me tell you about a secret that makes in-law scheming look amateur. I grew up adoring my older sister Emma. She was 17 years older than me, which meant she was less like a sibling and more like this impossibly cool aunt figure who existed somewhere between family and friend. She'd sneak me candy when our parents weren't looking, cover for me when I stayed out past curfew in high school, give me advice about boys and school and life that actually made sense. She was the person I went to when I needed someone who got it. Our parents were strict, like really strict, the kind of religious household where every rule had a Bible verse attached to it and questioning anything was considered disrespectful. They were especially tense around Emma, always had been for as long as I could remember. There was this weird energy whenever she was in the room, like everyone was walking on eggshells, but nobody would explain why. I just figured they were harder on her because she was the oldest, or maybe because she'd been rebellious as a teenager. They'd make these little comments sometimes, passive-aggressive digs about responsibility and consequences that I never fully understood. Emma moved out when I was 6, got her own apartment across town. She'd visit for holidays and birthdays, always bringing presents and hugs and this sadness in her eyes that I was too young to recognize. As I got older, I noticed she'd watch me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not jealousy exactly, but something close to grief, like she was mourning something she'd lost. I turned 23 last November. Emma came over for Thanksgiving like she always did, helped with the cooking, made small talk with our parents that felt performative and strained. After dinner, she started drinking. Not unusual, everyone had wine with Thanksgiving, but she kept going. Glass after glass while our parents exchanged looks and I tried to lighten the mood with stories from my new job. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, but full body sobs that came out of nowhere and wouldn't stop. Our parents immediately tried to shut it down, told her she'd had too much to drink and should go lie down. But Emma shook her head and looked right at me with tears streaming down her face and said something I'll never forget. She said she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't keep pretending. Our mother went pale. Our father stood up and said they should talk about this privately. But Emma ignored them both and kept staring at me with this desperate, broken expression. She kept apologizing, saying she was sorry for everything they made her do, sorry for all the years of lying, sorry for not being strong enough to tell me sooner. I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what she meant, tried to get her to explain, and that's when our mother cut in, voice sharp and cold, told Emma she was drunk and embarrassing herself, told her to stop this right now before she ruined everything. The way she said it made my stomach drop, because whatever this was, it was big, and our parents had been hiding it my entire life. I pressed Emma harder, asked her directly what was going on. She looked at our parents, then back at me, and the words that came out of her mouth changed everything. I'm not your sister. I'm your mother. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my mom, or the woman I thought was my mom, taking this sharp, horrified breath. Emma started explaining through tears. She'd gotten pregnant at 15. Some boy from school, a relationship our parents had forbidden. A stupid teenage mistake that happened once and derailed her entire life. When our parents found out, they were mortified. Not concerned, not supportive, just mortified. The shame of it, what people at church would say, how it would destroy their reputation in the community. So they came up with a plan. Emma would hide the pregnancy, stay home from school claiming illness, and when the baby came, when I came, they'd raise me as their own, tell everyone they'd decided to have another child later in life. Emma would go back to school, go back to normal, and nobody would ever know. Except Emma would know. She'd have to live with it every single day. They took me from her when I was born, made her sign papers, made her promise never to tell, threatened to cut her off completely if she ever tried to claim me. She was 15 years old and terrified and had no idea what else to do. So she agreed, and then she had to watch as they raised me, as I called them mum and dad, as I grew up thinking she was just my sister. She couldn't hold me the way she wanted to, couldn't comfort me when I was scared, couldn't be there for milestones and moments in the way a mother should be. She had to love me from a distance, had to pretend her own child was her sibling, had to swallow that grief for 23 years. I looked at our parents, or my grandparents, I guess, trying to process what I was hearing, asked if it was true. They didn't deny it, just sat there looking cornered and defensive. And finally, my father said they'd done what was best for everyone involved. Best for everyone. As if stealing Emma's baby and forcing her into 2 decades of silence was somehow a kindness. I asked Emma why she never told me. She said she wanted to, 1,000 times, but they'd made it clear that if she ever revealed the truth, she'd lose me completely. They'd make sure of it. And she'd been a terrified teenager who didn't know her rights, didn't have resources, didn't have anyone on her side. So she'd stayed quiet and tried to be the best sister she could be, even though every time I called her Emma instead of Mum, it broke something inside her. And here's where it gets absurd. My father actually tried to justify it, said they'd given me a good life, a stable home, opportunities Emma couldn't have provided at 15. Said Emma should be grateful they'd stepped in, that they'd saved her from ruining her future. Like raising your own child is ruining your future. Like loving your baby is something to be saved from. My mother chimed in, said this was ancient history that didn't need to be brought up now, that Emma was being selfish, that I was happy and well adjusted, and this revelation would only cause unnecessary pain. Unnecessary pain. As if the pain they'd caused Emma for 23 years was somehow necessary and acceptable. I couldn't stay in that house another second. I packed a bag and went to a friend's place that night. Just needed space to breathe and think. Emma texted me around midnight, apologizing for dropping this on me, saying she'd understand if I needed time. But I didn't need time away from her. I needed time away from the people who'd orchestrated this whole mess. We met for coffee the next day. She told me everything about my biological father, some kid who moved away junior year and never knew she was pregnant. About the pregnancy itself, hiding it under baggy clothes, being terrified and alone. About giving birth and having them immediately take me, barely letting her hold me before whisking me away to the nursery. She'd kept things over the years, pictures of her pregnant, though you could barely tell, notes she'd written to me on my birthdays that she never gave me, a box of memories she'd been too afraid to share but couldn't bring herself to throw away. The person sitting across from me wasn't my cool older sister anymore. She was my mother. She'd been my mother the whole time, and I'd never known. I moved in with Emma 2 weeks later, told my parents, my grandparents, whatever they were now, that I needed space. That's putting it mildly. What I actually needed was to completely rebuild my understanding of my own identity. We're trying to figure out this mother-daughter thing now. It's strange and painful and beautiful all at once. Emma doesn't expect me to suddenly start calling her mum, doesn't push for anything I'm not ready for. We're just taking it day by day, learning each other in this new context. I haven't spoken to my grandparents since I moved out. They've tried reaching out, sent messages through relatives, even showed up at Emma's place once. I told them through the door that I wasn't ready, and they needed to respect that. They built my entire childhood on a lie. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment of my life was based on this massive deception they'd maintained for over 2 decades, and the person who loved me most, who wanted me more than anything, had to stand on the sidelines and pretend she was just my sister. My whole identity shattered overnight. But at least now I know the truth. At least Emma doesn't have to carry this alone anymore. And maybe that's worth something. But family secrets aren't always kept by blood relatives. Sometimes strangers hold the keys to your destruction. I was always the black sheep in my family. Not because I did anything particularly wrong, just because I wasn't Tyler. My golden child brother could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was Dad's fishing buddy, Mum's pride and joy, the one who got the approving nods at family dinners while I got polite smiles and subject changes. Tyler was being groomed to take over Dad's construction business, had been since he was 16 and started working summers on the crew. Meanwhile, I went to college for accounting, got a normal office job, built a quiet life that nobody seemed particularly impressed by. Family gatherings always felt like the Tyler show, with me as the forgettable opening act. For my 40th birthday last year, my kids pooled their money and bought me one of those Ancestry DNA kits. You know the ones, spit in a tube, mail it off, find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. I did it mostly to humor them. Wasn't expecting anything interesting. I'm from the most generic white American background imaginable. Figured the results would confirm exactly that. A few weeks later, I got my results back. Ancestry breakdown was pretty much what I expected. But then I started getting match notifications. Distant cousins, people with tiny percentages of shared DNA that didn't mean much. And then one match that stopped me cold. A half-sibling match. Someone who shared 25% of my DNA. Her name was Becca. She lived 2 states away. And according to the website, we shared one parent. I sat there staring at my computer screen, trying to make sense of it. My parents had been married for 43 years. I knew every family story, every relative, every branch of the family tree. There was no secret sibling. There couldn't be. I messaged Becca, kept it casual, asked if she knew anything about the connection. She responded the next day, said she'd been expecting someone from my family to eventually show up in her results. Her mum had told her years ago that her biological father was a married man, a construction worker who'd had an affair with her mum in the late 80s. The affair lasted almost 3 years before the guy's wife found out, and he ended it. Her mum had been pregnant at the time but never told him. Raised Becca alone. The timeline matched my dad exactly. Late 80s, construction worker, married. And Becca was 35, which would make her conception right around the time my parents went through that weird rough patch they never talked about. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. My dad was a lot of things, but a cheater. Someone who'd abandon a pregnant woman and never look back. I confronted him on a Saturday afternoon, showed up at my parents' house with the DNA results printed out, asked him point blank if he knew someone named Rebecca, with a daughter about 35 years old. The look on his face told me everything before he said a word. He broke down, actually started crying, which I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life, admitted the whole thing, an affair that lasted years with a woman named Rebecca, who worked in the office of one of his subcontractors, said he'd fallen in love with her, had actually considered leaving Mum for her, but when Mum found out, she threatened to take everything, the house, the business, me and Tyler. So he ended it. Didn't know Rebecca was pregnant until months later when she sent him a letter. She told him to stay away, that she didn't want his money or his involvement, just wanted to raise her daughter in peace. So he did, stayed away for 35 years. Never told Mum about the baby, never tried to contact them, just pretended it never happened. I was processing this, trying to figure out how to feel about having a secret half-sister and a father who'd hidden her existence for decades, when I realized something. This could affect Tyler. If there was another heir to Dad's business, another child who could potentially make legal claims, Tyler needed to know. So I showed him the results, explained everything Dad had told me, figured we'd deal with this together, two brothers navigating our father's betrayal as a united front. That's when everything unraveled. Tyler went quiet while I was explaining, got this weird look on his face. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said maybe we should all get tested, just to be sure, before we started making any legal assumptions about inheritance. I didn't understand why he'd suggest that, until he admitted he'd done his own DNA test 2 years ago, one of those health screening ones that also shows genetic relatives. And our dad hadn't shown up as a match. Mum had made him promise never to tell anyone. She'd explained it away as a lab error, convinced him to keep quiet, said it would destroy the family if Dad found out. Tyler had believed her because the alternative was too devastating to consider. But it wasn't a lab error. Tyler wasn't Dad's biological son. My perfect golden child brother, the heir to the family business, Dad's fishing buddy, and pride and joy, wasn't actually related to him at all. Mom had her own affair, apparently right around the same time Dad was seeing Rebecca, and she'd never told anyone. The irony was almost funny. Both of our parents had been unfaithful. Both had secret children from those affairs. Tyler and I had spent 40 years thinking we were full brothers in a normal, if imperfect, family. Turns out we were half-siblings in a family built entirely on lies. I told Dad. Had to. This wasn't just about his secret anymore. He confronted Mum. She admitted it, some guy she'd met at a conference, a brief affair that ended when she realized she was pregnant and decided to just pretend the baby was Dad's. Things went from bad to unhinged. Dad was devastated. Not because Tyler wasn't his biological son, that part he seemed willing to overlook, but because Mom had judged him so harshly for his affair while hiding her own, because he'd ended a relationship he cared about and abandoned his daughter out of guilt, while Mom had just seamlessly integrated her affair baby into their family. Mom was furious that I'd exposed everything, blamed me for ruining the family by doing that stupid DNA test. Tyler was caught in the middle, discovering that the father he'd worshipped his whole life wasn't actually his father, and the special bond they'd shared was based on a lie. The business situation became a nightmare. Dad's lawyer got involved. Turns out because Tyler wasn't biologically his son and there was no formal adoption, the inheritance situation was complicated. Dad could still leave him the business, but it wasn't the automatic transfer everyone had assumed. And then Dad did something nobody expected. He left the business to me, said I was his only biological child, his only real heir, said Tyler would be taken care of financially, but the business itself was mine. I think part of it was spite toward Mum, a final punishment for her affair. Part of it was maybe genuine, some belief that blood mattered more than the 40 years he'd spent raising Tyler as his son. Tyler barely speaks to me now, blames me for everything, like I somehow caused this instead of just being the person who uncovered it. Our parents divorced at 70, splitting assets and fighting over things that don't matter while their entire family disintegrates. I reached out to Becca. We've met a few times. She's nice, has a good life, didn't need or want anything from our family drama. Just thought it was cool to have a half brother, even if that brother came with a truckload of baggage. The perfect family was always a lie. Both parents cheating, both hiding children, everyone pretending everything was fine while secrets rotted underneath. And I'm left running a business I never wanted, estranged from the brother I grew up with, all because my kids bought me a birthday present. And you know what's worse than discovering family lies? Discovering your own sibling will destroy you to save themselves. My younger brother Marcus always had a sketchy side. When we were kids, he'd steal candy from the corner store and blame it on his friends. In high school, he got caught shoplifting twice, and both times my parents bailed him out with the usual speech about second chances and learning from mistakes. By the time he hit his 20s, Marcus had moved on to what he called business ventures, but what I recognized as shady deals that always seemed to collapse right before they got too legal attention. He'd flip cars with suspiciously absent titles, sell electronics that fell off trucks, that sort of thing. But he was my little brother, and despite everything, I kept telling myself that family is family. You don't abandon blood, even when that blood makes your life significantly harder. So when our entire family gathered at my parents' house for Dad's retirement party, I didn't think twice about Marcus being there. There were about 20 of us, cousins and aunts and uncles, all celebrating Dad's 40 years at the manufacturing plant. It was a good day, or at least it started that way. People were laughing, Dad was giving his slightly drunk speech about the value of hard work, and Mum was already crying happy tears before dessert even came out. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was my dad, and his voice had that cold, clipped tone I'd only heard a handful of times in my life. He told me that $15,000 in cash was missing from his safe. Along with it, 2 of his vintage watches and a collection of rare coins he'd been building since before I was born. He asked me point blank if I knew anything about it. I was confused. I told him no, of course not. Why would he even ask me that? There was a long pause, and then he said Marcus had come to him the night before with concerns. Marcus had seen me near Dad's office during the party. He said I'd looked nervous, kept checking my phone, seemed distracted, and apparently Marcus had heard through the family grapevine that my wife and I were having money troubles. That last part wasn't even true. We'd refinanced our mortgage, which someone must have misunderstood as financial desperation. But we were fine. Better than fine, actually. But Dad's voice told me he'd already made up his mind before he even called. I tried to defend myself. I told him I'd gone near his office exactly once, to use the bathroom in that hallway because the main one was occupied. I explained the mortgage situation. I reminded him that I had a stable job and no history of theft, unlike certain other people at that party. He didn't want to hear it. He said Marcus had been very upset, very concerned, and that he'd noticed these things in real time, not after the fact. My dad told me he was disappointed, and that if I didn't return what I'd taken, he'd have no choice but to involve the police. I hung up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My parents stopped answering my calls. My mum sent a single text that said she never thought I'd be capable of something like this. Extended family members started messaging me with vague, disappointed statements, or just stopped interacting altogether. Marcus, the golden child who'd failed upward his entire life, had somehow managed to paint me as the family villain. And here's where it gets absurd. He kept the pressure on. He'd post on social media about the importance of honesty and integrity. He'd call our relatives to express how heartbroken he was about the whole situation. He even suggested to Dad that maybe I needed professional help for whatever was going on in my life that would drive me to steal from my own father. I was furious, but more than that, I was devastated. My wife Sophie could see I was falling apart. She kept telling me the truth would come out, that we'd figure this out, but I couldn't see how. Marcus had positioned himself perfectly. He'd reported his concerns before the theft was even discovered, which made him look proactive and honest. He had no obvious motive because as far as anyone knew, Marcus had been doing fine, and I was the one with supposed money troubles who'd been seen near the office. Then came the breaking point. Sophie was cleaning out my car one Saturday, just tidying up because we had her parents visiting that weekend. She found a folder that had slipped under the passenger seat, and when she opened it to see if it was important, she found something that changed everything. It was a stack of pawn shop receipts, old ones dated 3 and 4 weeks before Dad's retirement party, and the items listed matched exactly what had been taken from Dad's safe. 2 vintage Rolex watches, a collection of American Eagle gold coins, and a few other pieces of jewelry that had also gone missing but hadn't been the main focus because of the cash. She called me immediately. I drove home so fast I'm surprised I didn't get pulled over. When I saw those receipts, my hands were shaking. The pawn shop was across town, the dates were clear, and the descriptions were too specific to be coincidence. But the receipts had a different name on them, someone called David Reeves. It took me about 10 seconds to remember that David Reeves was the fake ID name Marcus had used in college when he wanted to get into bars underage. He'd thought it was hilarious. He'd even shown it to me once. I wanted to march straight to my parents' house and throw the receipts in Marcus's face, but Sophie stopped me. She said we needed to be smarter than that. Marcus had already framed me once. If we came at him with just this, he'd find a way to spin it, claim the receipts were planted or forged, make himself the victim again. We needed everything, a full picture that he couldn't wriggle out of. So I hired a private investigator. It cost money we hadn't budgeted for, but I didn't care. The PI was a former cop named Gavin, who specialized in fraud cases, and when I showed him the pawn shop receipts and explained the situation, he got this look on his face like he'd seen this exact story play out before. He told me to give him 2 weeks. Gavin came back with a file that was thicker than I expected. Turns out Marcus had gambling debts, serious ones. He owed money to at least 2 different bookies, and from what Gavin could piece together, he was into them for nearly 30 grand. The pawn shop receipts were just the start. Gavin found that Marcus had a pattern of theft from 3 previous employers. One was a retail job where inventory kept going missing during his shifts. Another was a warehouse gig where tools and equipment vanished. The third was a sales position where he'd been fired quietly after cash deposits didn't match up. None of them had pressed charges because they just wanted him gone, but the records were there if you knew where to look. Gavin even tracked down one of the bookies, who confirmed on a recorded phone call that Marcus had made a payment of $15,000 in cash exactly 3 days after Dad's retirement party. I had everything: dates, receipts, witness statements, records of his debts, proof of the pawn transactions weeks before the theft was reported. It was undeniable. Marcus, in his infinite arrogance, decided to orchestrate a family dinner 2 weeks later. He framed it as a chance for reconciliation, a time for me to come clean and apologize so the family could heal. My parents agreed to host it. I got the invitation via my mum, who said she hoped I'd do the right thing. I told her I'd be there and that I'd absolutely be doing the right thing. The night of the dinner, I walked in with a briefcase. Marcus saw it and got this smug little smile, probably assuming I was bringing some kind of apology statement or restitution offer. My parents looked exhausted. A few aunts and uncles were there too, probably expecting a dramatic confession from me. We sat down. Marcus started talking, giving this whole speech about how painful this had been for him, how he just wanted his brother back, how he'd prayed I'd find the courage to be honest. It was almost impressive how committed he was to the performance. When he finished, I opened the briefcase. I pulled out the folder and slid the pawn shop receipts across the table to my dad. I explained what they were, when they were dated, and how the items matched. Marcus went pale, but he tried to recover. He said he didn't know what I was talking about, that those could be anyone's receipts, that this was clearly a desperate attempt to shift blame. So I pulled out the next document, a printed record of his gambling debts, complete with names and amounts. Then the employment records from his previous jobs, showing the thefts and quiet terminations. Then the recorded statement from the bookie confirming the $15,000 cash payment 3 days after the party. You almost have to admire the audacity of someone who thought they could pull this off. Marcus tried to speak, started to say something about fabricated evidence, but his voice cracked. My dad was reading through everything, his face getting redder with each page. My mum had her hand over her mouth. I looked at Marcus and told him exactly what I thought. I said he'd thrown me under the bus to save himself, destroyed my relationship with our parents, let me suffer for weeks, all because he couldn't handle his own mess. I told him I was done protecting him, done making excuses, Done pretending family meant unconditional tolerance for his garbage behavior. Dad stood up. He didn't yell. He just walked to the phone and called the police. He told them he needed to report a theft and that he knew who was responsible. Marcus tried to leave, but my uncle blocked the door. We all just sat there in the heaviest silence I've ever experienced until the cops arrived. Marcus was arrested that night. The evidence was overwhelming. He's currently awaiting trial, facing charges for the theft, and the DA is also looking into the previous employment situations now that they're on record. His lawyer tried to negotiate some kind of plea deal, but Dad refused. He wants this to go all the way. My parents apologized to me. It wasn't easy for them. My dad especially struggled with it because admitting he'd believed Marcus over me meant confronting how badly he'd misjudged both of his sons. My mum cried for hours. They've asked for forgiveness, and I'm working on giving it to them. But it's a process. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, especially when it was shattered so completely. I still see them. We have dinners, we talk. They've met with Sophie and apologized to her too for what we went through. But there's a distance now that didn't used to be there. A carefulness. They know they failed me when it mattered most, and I know they're capable of believing the worst of me if someone spins the story right. We're rebuilding, but it's on a different foundation now. Marcus hasn't tried to contact me. I wouldn't answer if he did. Some people think I should feel bad about what happened to him, that he's still my brother and family should stick together. But the thing is, Marcus made his choices. He chose to steal. He chose to frame me. He chose to double down and orchestrate that dinner thinking he'd win. Every consequence he's facing now is one he built for himself. Sometimes the thief isn't in your family. They're sitting in the office next to you. I thought Jennifer and I were friends, real friends, not just the kind of co-workers who smile at each other in meetings and then never speak outside of work. We started at the marketing firm on the same day, went through new hire orientation together, and bonded over how overwhelming everything felt those first few weeks. We'd grab lunch at least twice a week, vent about difficult clients over coffee, and text each other ridiculous memes when we were stuck in boring conference calls. She was the person who made that job feel less isolating. We had similar backgrounds too. Both of us had graduated with marketing degrees around the same time. Both were trying to break into the industry in meaningful ways. Both were hungry to prove ourselves. It felt like we were in it together, like we were building our careers side by side and supporting each other along the way. Then I got promoted to senior analyst. It was a position we'd both applied for, which I knew at the time but didn't think would be an issue. We'd actually talked about it beforehand, joking about how whoever got it would have to buy the other one a consolation drink. I genuinely thought we were cool with the competition. When I got the call from my manager offering me the position, I was thrilled but also a little nervous about how Jennifer would take it. I told her the next day, trying to be sensitive about it. She smiled and congratulated me, said all the right things about how I deserved it, and she was happy for me. We even went out for drinks that night like we'd planned, and she toasted to my success. Everything seemed fine, but her warmth turned cold overnight. It was subtle at first. She stopped suggesting lunch. When I'd walk up to her desk to chat, she'd suddenly be very busy with something urgent. The memes stopped. The after-work venting sessions disappeared. In meetings, she'd barely make eye contact with me. If I offered an idea, she'd either ignore it or find some way to undermine it. I tried to talk to her about it, asked if everything was okay between us. She brushed me off, said she was just stressed with work and it wasn't personal. But it felt personal. It felt like I'd lost a friend the moment I'd gotten something she wanted. 2 weeks after my promotion, HR called me into a meeting. I walked in thinking it was maybe some routine check-in or paperwork related to my new role. Instead, I found our HR director and our head of IT security waiting for me with very serious expressions. They told me to sit down, and my stomach immediately dropped. They explained that during a random audit of office equipment, they'd found a USB drive in my desk drawer. That alone wouldn't have been a big deal, except this particular USB drive contained confidential client data. Financial records, strategy documents, proprietary information that was supposed to be stored only on our secure servers. Having it on an external drive was a massive violation of company policy and potentially illegal depending on what had been done with it. I was completely blindsided. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about, that I'd never seen that USB drive before, that I would never compromise client data like that. They listened with skeptical faces and told me I was being suspended pending a full investigation. I needed to leave the building immediately, turn in my badge and laptop, and wait to hear from them. I was terrified. My career was on the line for something I didn't do, and I had no idea how to prove my innocence. I went home in a daze, called my parents crying, and tried to figure out what the hell was happening. The more I thought about it, the more it felt wrong. I'm obsessively organized with my desk. I would have noticed a random USB drive, and I'd certainly never downloaded confidential client data onto one. That's when I started thinking about Jennifer. The timing was too perfect. Her sudden coldness, and then suddenly I'm being accused of a career-ending violation. But I had no proof, just a gut feeling and a lot of paranoia. I spent the weekend spiraling, imagining worst-case scenarios where I got fired, blacklisted from the industry, maybe even faced legal charges. Monday morning, I called a lawyer. I explained the situation, and he immediately suggested we request security footage from the office. I'd honestly forgotten we had cameras. They were mostly pointed at entrances and common areas, but there was one in the hallway near the cubicles that might have caught something. My lawyer sent a formal request to the company for any footage showing my desk area in the week leading up to the audit. The company initially pushed back, said it wasn't necessary, but my lawyer insisted. If they were going to accuse me of data theft, I had the right to see any evidence that might prove my innocence. And here's where it gets absurd. The footage came back, and there she was. Jennifer, clear as day on camera, walking to my desk at 7:30 on a Thursday evening. I'd left work at 5 that day for a dentist appointment, so I wasn't there. The timestamp showed her looking around to make sure no one was watching, opening my desk drawer and placing something small inside. She closed the drawer, looked around again, and walked away. The whole thing took maybe 20 seconds. My lawyer and I watched it 3 times to make sure we weren't misinterpreting what we were seeing, but there was no other explanation. Jennifer had planted that USB drive in my desk. The company launched a deeper investigation after seeing the footage. IT security did a full audit of Jennifer's computer activity and found that she'd accessed and downloaded the confidential client data months before I was even promoted. She'd saved it to a USB drive, presumably as some kind of insurance or leverage, and had been sitting on it waiting for the right opportunity to use it. When I got the promotion she wanted, I became that opportunity. She'd planted the evidence in my desk and then apparently triggered the audit herself by submitting an anonymous tip to HR about suspected data breaches in our department. She'd literally orchestrated the entire thing to frame me, destroy my career, and presumably get me fired so the position might open back up. The level of calculation was honestly shocking. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd been planning this for months, just waiting for the right target. And she'd chosen me, someone she'd called a friend, someone she'd had lunch with and laughed with, all because I got a job she wanted. Jennifer was fired immediately, but it didn't stop there. Because she'd stolen confidential client data and attempted to frame someone else for it, the company referred the case to law enforcement. She ended up facing criminal charges for data theft and fraud. I don't know exactly how her case turned out, but last I heard she was looking at serious legal consequences and would probably never work in marketing again. As for me, I was cleared of all accusations, given a formal apology from the company, and honestly they seemed pretty embarrassed about the whole thing. They offered me additional compensation for the stress and reputational damage, and 3 months later I got promoted again to department manager, partially because they felt terrible about what happened, and partially because I'd proven I could handle high-pressure situations with professionalism. I now manage the entire department Jennifer and I both started in. It's surreal sometimes thinking about how different things could have turned out if we hadn't had those security cameras, or if my lawyer hadn't fought to request the footage. I could have been the one fired and facing charges for something I didn't do. My career could have been destroyed by someone I trusted. The whole experience taught me to be more careful about who I trust at work. Not everyone who smiles at you over lunch has your best interest at heart. Some people will absolutely sabotage you the moment they see you as competition, even if you've never done anything to hurt them. Jennifer gave herself enough rope and then tied the knot herself. All I had to do was make sure someone was watching. But sometimes workplace betrayal isn't about stealing your job, it's about stealing your accomplishments entirely. I spent 6 months developing a revolutionary inventory system for our warehouse. 6 months of late nights, weekends sacrificed, endless testing and debugging, troubleshooting problems that would pop up at 2 in the morning when I should have been sleeping. This wasn't some minor improvement to an existing system. This was a complete overhaul, a custom-built solution that automated processes we'd been doing manually for years. I worked in logistics for a mid-sized distribution company. Our inventory tracking was a disaster, outdated software that required constant manual input and reconciliation. Mistakes were common, which meant shipment delays, which meant angry clients. I'd pitched the idea of building a new system to my boss Derek about 8 months before. He'd been skeptical, but eventually agreed to let me work on it as a side project, as long as my regular duties didn't suffer. So I did both. 40-hour weeks became 60-hour weeks. I taught myself new programming languages, studied inventory management theory, interviewed warehouse staff about their pain points, built the system piece by piece, tested it in a sandbox environment, worked out the bugs, then tested it again. When we finally launched it company-wide, the results were immediate. Inventory errors dropped by 90% in the first month. Processing time for shipments was cut in half. We could suddenly track everything in real time, predict stock shortages before they happened, optimize warehouse space in ways we'd never been able to before. The CFO ran the numbers and determined the system was saving the company roughly $200,000 annually. It was the biggest success our department had seen in years, and I was proud. This was mine, my innovation, my hard work paying off in a tangible way that made everyone's job easier. Then Derek presented it to corporate as his innovation. I wasn't even in the meeting. Found out about it later when a coworker congratulated me on being part of Derek's amazing project. Part of it. Not the creator, just a participant. I pulled up the presentation Derek had given, watched him explain the system, take credit for the concept, the design, the implementation. He mentioned the team a few times in vague terms, thanked people for their contributions, but positioned himself as the visionary who'd made it all happen. My name appeared once in small text on a slide listing team members, grouped with 5 other people who'd done maybe 10 hours of work total compared to my hundreds. Derek was nominated for a VP position off the back of that presentation. The system that I built that consumed half a year of my life was apparently his golden ticket to the executive level. I was furious, but I was also terrified. Derek controlled my performance reviews, my raises, my entire career trajectory at this company. If I spoke up and it went badly, I could tank my future. So I stayed quiet and sieved and told myself it wasn't worth the risk. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 months after his initial presentation, Derek scheduled a follow-up with the board of directors. They wanted a deeper dive into the system, technical details about how it worked and how it could potentially be scaled to other parts of the company. This was a big deal. The board didn't usually get involved in departmental projects, but this one had caught their attention. Derek asked me to prepare the presentation slides, gave me a list of topics the board wanted covered, told me to make it impressive. I spent a week putting together a comprehensive deck, explaining the algorithm, the database structure, the integration points with existing systems, future expansion possibilities. It was detailed, technical, the kind of presentation that required actually understanding how the system worked on a fundamental level. Derek didn't bother learning any of it. I offered to walk him through the technical aspects, do a practice run, make sure he could answer questions. He waved me off, said he'd be fine, he knew enough to handle it. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Derek had me sit in the back of the room, said he might need me to clarify minor details if technical questions came up. The board filed in, 7 executives including the CEO, all expecting to be impressed by Derek's brilliant innovation. He started strong. The first few slides were high-level overview stuff, benefits and cost savings, easy material he could handle. But then one of the board members, the CTO, raised his hand about 15 minutes in. He asked a complex question about the algorithm that handled predictive inventory ordering, wanted to know specifically how we'd weighted historical data against seasonal trends and how the system adapted when those trends shifted unexpectedly. It was a good question, one I could have answered easily because I'd spent weeks fine-tuning that exact algorithm. Derek froze. You could see it happen in real time. His confident presentation voice faltered. He glanced at the slide, which showed a simplified flowchart I'd created but didn't contain the level of detail needed to answer the question. He tried to improvise, started talking about data analysis in vague terms that didn't actually address what the CTO had asked. The CTO pressed him, asked a follow-up question, something more specific about the mathematical model we were using. Derek fumbled harder, threw out some buzzwords, machine learning and optimization and predictive analytics, terms that sounded impressive but didn't mean anything in the context of the actual question. Then Derek looked at me, desperate, panicked, clearly hoping I'd bail him out. I stayed silent, just sat there in the back of the room, meeting his eyes with a blank expression, watching him crash and burn with the board of directors. He tried to redirect, said we could follow up on the technical details later, attempted to move to the next slide, but the damage was done. The CTO looked skeptical. Other board members started asking their own questions, probing deeper into how the system actually worked. Derek couldn't answer any of them. He'd memorized my slides but had no understanding of the underlying content. The presentation that was supposed to seal his VP promotion turned into a 20-minute disaster where it became increasingly obvious he didn't know what he was talking about. After the meeting ended, Derek rushed out looking like he might be sick. The board members lingered, talking among themselves, clearly unimpressed. I waited until most of them had left, then approached the CTO and the VP of operations, who were still gathering their materials. I requested a private audience, said I had some concerns about the presentation they'd just seen, and some documentation they might want to review. They agreed to meet with me the next morning. I showed up with everything. Original code repositories with timestamps showing I'd created and committed every major piece of the system. Email chains where I'd explained concepts to Derek and asked for approvals on design decisions. Design documents in my handwriting. Meeting notes from sessions with warehouse staff where I'd gathered requirements. A complete paper trail proving that I'd built the system from the ground up, while Derek had contributed essentially nothing beyond signing off on budget requests. The VP of operations asked why I hadn't brought this up sooner. I was honest, said I'd been afraid of retaliation, that Derek controlled my career prospects, and I didn't think anyone would believe me over him. The CTO asked if I could answer the questions Derek had failed to address yesterday. I walked them through the entire technical architecture, explained the algorithm in detail, outlined how we could scale the system to other divisions, answered every question they threw at me without hesitation because I'd built the thing and knew it inside and out. Things went from bad to unhinged. The company launched an investigation, interviewed other team members who confirmed I'd done the overwhelming majority of the work, reviewed documentation that supported my timeline, found other instances where Derek had taken credit for subordinates' work. Just less egregiously than this, Derek was demoted, not fired, but stripped of his management position and moved to a project coordinator role. The VP promotion he'd been nominated for went away. His reputation within the company was destroyed, and I got his job. They promoted me to department manager, gave me Derek's old office, his salary, his responsibilities. Everything he'd been trying to climb toward by stealing my work, I received because I'd actually earned it. Derek now reports to me. The first team meeting after the reorganization was surreal, watching him sit in the conference room with everyone else while I stood at the head of the table, knowing he was seething but couldn't say anything. He tried to quit twice in the first month, but in this economy with his reputation damaged, he couldn't find anything comparable. So he stayed, and every day he has to answer to the person whose career he tried to destroy. I don't gloat. Don't rub it in. Just do my job and manage the team fairly, including him. Professional to a fault because that hurts worse than any petty revenge could. And when your boss won't protect you, sometimes the entire system fails you too. When my supervisor sexually harassed me repeatedly, I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, that if I just ignored it, he'd stop. Classic denial, I know, but when you need your job and the person making you uncomfortable controls your schedule and your performance reviews, you convince yourself of a lot of things. It started small. Comments about my appearance that felt just slightly too personal. Compliments that lingered a beat too long, standing too close during conversations. The kind of behavior that makes your skin crawl, but is hard to articulate to someone else without sounding paranoid. Then it escalated. He started finding reasons to touch me, hand on my shoulder during meetings, brushing against me when passing in the hallway, even though there was plenty of room. Once he came up behind me while I was at my desk and put both hands on my shoulders, started massaging them while talking about how stressed I looked. I froze completely, had no idea how to react. The comments got worse too. Jokes about my dating life, questions about whether I had a boyfriend, followed by suggestions that he could take me out sometime, show me how a real man treats a woman, all delivered with this smile like it was harmless flirting, like I should be flattered. I documented everything in a private folder on my personal laptop. Dates, times, what he said, who else was around. Part of me knew I'd need evidence eventually. The other part hoped I'd never have to use it. After 3 months of this, after he cornered me in the supply room and told me I looked good enough to eat while standing way too close, I finally gathered the courage to report him to HR. The HR director was a woman named Susan. She'd been with the company for 15 years, seemed professional and competent. When I scheduled a meeting with her, I felt hopeful. A woman would understand, would take this seriously, would help me. Susan seemed sympathetic during our initial conversation, nodded in all the right places, took detailed notes, assured me she took these allegations very seriously. She promised a thorough investigation, said she'd interview witnesses and review any evidence I had, told me I was brave for coming forward and that the company had zero tolerance for harassment. I left that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. Finally, someone was going to do something. 2 weeks later, Susan called me back to her office, said they'd looked into my complaint, interviewed my supervisor and several co-workers. According to her, they'd found no evidence to support my claims. My supervisor denied everything. The co-workers said they'd never witnessed inappropriate behavior. Susan suggested that I'd misinterpreted friendly behavior, that maybe I wasn't used to a workplace culture where people were warm and personable. She actually used those words, warm and personable. I sat there stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. I had documentation. I had specific incidents with dates and times, and I was being told I'd imagined it all. Susan suggested I consider whether this job was the right fit for me, said maybe the stress was affecting my perception, that perhaps I'd be happier somewhere else. It was the kind of suggestion that wasn't quite a threat, but definitely wasn't supportive. I left her office feeling worse than before I'd reported anything. Humiliated, defeated, questioning my own sanity. And here's where it gets absurd. My supervisor got bolder after that. He knew HR had cleared him, knew he was protected. The comments became more explicit, the touching more frequent. He'd make jokes about the investigation in front of other people, say things like he was glad we'd cleared up that misunderstanding. Wasn't it funny how people could misread situations? I felt trapped. I'd reported him through the proper channels and been dismissed. What else could I do? I needed this job. I had rent to pay, student loans, a car payment. Quitting without something else lined up wasn't an option. So I started documenting everything again, but this time I wasn't planning to take it to Susan. I didn't know what I was planning, just knew I needed evidence of what was happening. That's when I discovered I wasn't the first. I was digging through old company directories one night, trying to find the contact information for a former co-worker who might serve as a witness if I ever found another avenue to pursue this. I noticed several women had left the company over the past few years, all from positions similar to mine. On impulse, I started looking them up on LinkedIn. I reached out to 3 of them with careful messages, said I'd worked at the company, was dealing with some workplace issues, wondered if they'd be willing to talk. 2 responded. We set up phone calls, and what they told me made my blood run cold. Both had reported harassment. Different supervisors, but same pattern. Both had gone to Susan. Both had been told there was no evidence, that they'd misunderstood, that maybe they should consider other opportunities. Both had eventually quit, rather than continue dealing with the hostile environment. I tracked down 5 more former female employees, got contact info through mutual connections, professional networks, some creative internet searching, 7 women total who'd worked at the company in the last 6 years. Every single one had reported some form of harassment or discrimination. Every single one had been gaslit by Susan. Every single one had been quietly pushed out. But that wasn't even the worst part. One of the women I talked to had done some digging before she left. Found out that Susan's brother-in-law was the CFO, and the men who'd been reported for harassment, they were all friends with the CFO. Golf buddies, went to the same church. Their kids played on the same youth sports teams. Susan wasn't protecting these men out of incompetence. She was protecting them because they were part of her family's social circle. The company had a systematic problem. Susan had spent years burying complaints to protect powerful men who were connected to her personally. How many women had been harassed and then forced out? How many careers had been derailed? How many times had predators been enabled? I was furious. Not just for myself anymore, but for all of us. I started compiling everything. Testimonies from the 7 women I'd contacted, all willing to go on record. Email evidence showing Susan had closed investigations without proper procedure. Documentation of the relationship between Susan and the CFO. Proof that multiple women had reported the same supervisors and nothing had been done. It took me 3 months to put it all together. I contacted a labor attorney who specialized in harassment and discrimination cases. She reviewed everything and said we had a solid case, not just against my supervisor, but against the company for systematic failure to address harassment. I sent the full documentation package to 3 places simultaneously: the Board of Directors, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and my attorney, who filed a formal complaint. Then I waited. The federal investigation launched within 2 weeks. EEOC doesn't mess around when you hand them evidence of systematic discrimination and complaint suppression. They came in and started interviewing current and former employees, requesting personnel files, digging through HR records. The board went into crisis mode. Suddenly, they were very interested in how Susan had been handling harassment complaints. Turns out when you show them evidence that the company has been systematically protecting harassers and pushing out victims, they get concerned about liability. Susan was fired within a month. The CFO was forced to resign. My supervisor and 2 other men who'd been reported multiple times were terminated. The company settled lawsuits with 6 of the women I'd contacted, myself included. My settlement had a non-disclosure agreement, but I don't need to share the number to tell you it was enough to make quitting and finding a new job financially viable. They brought in real HR professionals, not someone's relative hired to protect the old boys club, but actual trained professionals from outside the company who implemented real policies and reporting procedures. I left the company 3 months after the settlement. Couldn't stay there after everything that had happened, even with the problematic people gone. The place was too tainted, but I heard from former co-workers that things actually changed, that the new HR department took complaints seriously, that women weren't being quietly pushed out anymore. 7 women had their careers derailed, their complaints buried, their experiences dismissed. We all thought we were alone, that we'd somehow failed by not being believed. Turns out we were part of a pattern, victims of a system designed to protect the wrong people, and the person tasked with protecting us was the architect of that system. Of course, corporate sabotage isn't always about covering up harassment. Sometimes it's about replacing you entirely. I'd been the regional sales manager for 8 years. 8 years of consistently exceeding targets, building relationships with clients, mentoring new hires, and basically carrying the entire department through multiple economic downturns. I knew that territory inside and out. Every account, every contact, every seasonal trend. I wasn't just good at my job, I was the person everyone came to when they needed results. Then new ownership took over. It started with the usual corporate acquisition nonsense. New mission statements, rebranded letterhead, mandatory team-building exercises that felt like thinly veiled psychological evaluations. The new executives came in with their own people, their own way of doing things, and this vague talk about building a different culture. I didn't love it, but I figured I'd done this long enough to weather another ownership change. But something felt off from the beginning. The new regional director, a guy named Brad who'd never worked a day in actual sales, started treating me differently. Conversations that used to be collaborative became one-sided directives. Strategy meetings I'd always attended suddenly happened without me, and when I'd ask about them, I'd get vague excuses about scheduling conflicts or it not being relevant to my immediate responsibilities. My ideas were dismissed, my reports were scrutinized in ways they'd never been before. The warmth and respect I'd built over nearly a decade just evaporated. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just an adjustment period and things would settle. But the exclusion kept getting worse. Emails I should have been copied on weren't reaching me. Decisions about my own territory were being made without my input. and Brad kept having these hushed conversations with HR that would stop the moment I walked past. Then my assistant accidentally forwarded me an email that changed everything. She was organizing Brad's calendar and meant to send me something else, but instead I got a meeting invite titled Regional Restructure, Confidential. It was scheduled for the exact week I was supposed to be on vacation, a trip I'd had planned for months. The attendee list included Brad, the VP of Operations, HR, and several people I didn't recognize. My name was nowhere on it. My stomach dropped. I'd seen this play before at other companies. The secret meeting during someone's vacation, the confidential restructure discussion, the convenient timing. They were planning to get rid of me, and they wanted me gone before I could see it coming. I smelled betrayal in the air, and it reeked. I cancelled my vacation that same day, told the company I had a family emergency and needed to stay local, but I'd still be taking the time off. I made sure Brad and HR knew I wouldn't be in the office. Then I did absolutely nothing to indicate I suspected anything. I posted vacation photos from a local park on social media to make it look like I'd gone somewhere. I stayed off email. I made myself invisible. The morning of the secret meeting, I woke up at 5. I got dressed in full business attire, drove to the office, and parked in the visitor lot where my car wouldn't be recognized. I used my badge to get in through the side entrance before anyone else arrived, went straight to the small conference room adjacent to the main one where I knew they'd be meeting, and I waited. At 8:30, I heard voices filtering through the wall. Our office had these older conference rooms with thin walls, and if you were quiet, you could hear basically everything happening next door. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and just let it run. Brad started the meeting by thanking everyone for their discretion. He said the transition needed to be handled delicately to avoid disruption. Then he introduced someone named Eric, apparently my replacement, who'd already been hired and was waiting in the wings. Eric had a background in tech sales, which was fine, except our region sold industrial equipment. Completely different skill set. But apparently Brad had promised him the role weeks ago. The HR rep walked through the plan. They'd eliminate my position entirely and create a new role with a slightly different title, which Eric would fill. That way, it wouldn't look like a direct replacement, just departmental evolution. They'd offer me a small severance package, 2 months maybe, and frame my exit as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Brad even joked about how I'd probably be relieved to move on after so many years in the same role. I sat there listening to them casually dismantle my career, like it was a budget line item. But that wasn't even the worst part. They started rehearsing how they'd announce it to the rest of the team. Brad was practicing his speech about bringing in fresh perspectives and evolving with market demands. The VP suggested they announce it on a Friday afternoon to minimize pushback. Someone else recommended having security on standby in case I reacted poorly when they told me. They were literally planning for the possibility that I'd need to be escorted out of my own office. The audacity of sitting there plotting someone's professional execution while they think you're on a beach somewhere. I gave them about 40 minutes to really commit to their plan. I wanted everything on record, every detail, every name. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, walked out of the side conference room, and knocked on the door of theirs. The silence that followed was beautiful. Brad opened the door, and I watched the color drain from his face in real time. Behind him, I could see the others frozen mid-conversation. Someone had been mid-sentence about severance calculations. Eric, my supposed replacement, looked confused about who I even was. I walked in without waiting for an invitation, set my phone on the table, and hit play. My voice came through crystal clear. Brad's voice, the HR rep, the VP, all of them discussing my termination, the fabricated reasoning, the timeline, the security precautions. I let about 2 minutes play before I stopped it and looked directly at Brad. I told him we needed to have a very different conversation than the one he'd been planning. I said I had 8 years of documented performance reviews, client testimonials, and exceeded quotas. I had this recording of them planning to illegally terminate me and replace me with someone less qualified. And I had a lawyer who specialized in wrongful termination, who I'd be very happy to introduce them to if we couldn't come to a reasonable agreement right now. Brad tried to sputter something about this being a misunderstanding. The HR rep looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The VP actually had the nerve to say I was overreacting. I just stared at them and waited. Within an hour, I'd negotiated a year's severance with full benefits. glowing references that were legally binding, and a consultant contract for the next 6 months to ensure proper transition of my accounts. I also made sure Eric's offer was rescinded before he even officially started. If they wanted to restructure, they could do it without destroying someone else's career in the process. I walked out of that building the same day, and I never went back except to clear out my office with a witness present. The severance alone was more than I would have made staying another year under Brad's management, and the consultant contract let me work from home on my own schedule while still pulling income. Brad was demoted 3 months later when the region's sales tanked without me. Turns out you can't just plug in some random tech bro and expect industrial equipment clients to go along with it. The VP quietly left the company. HR issued a formal apology that I'm sure their legal team drafted, and I ended up getting recruited by a competitor who'd heard about what happened and wanted someone with exactly my experience and backbone. The whole thing taught me to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, when you're being excluded and sidelined for no clear reason, you're probably right. And sometimes the best move is to show up when they least expect you and make them explain themselves in real time. They thought they could replace me quietly, erase 8 years of work, and move on like I'd never existed. Instead, they handed me leverage, a year of paid freedom, and a reputation for not backing down when someone tries to screw me over. But workplace drama is nothing compared to when strangers invade your private life. I started receiving anonymous messages on a Thursday night, just a text from an unknown number that said, "You looked peaceful last night." No context, no explanation. I stared at it for a minute, trying to figure out if it was a wrong number or some weird spam. Then the photo loaded. It was me, asleep in my bed, in my own bedroom, taken through my window. My stomach dropped. I could see myself clearly in the frame, curled up under my blanket, completely unconscious and vulnerable. The angle was from outside, looking in through the gap in my curtains. Someone had stood in my yard in the middle of the night and photographed me sleeping. I immediately called the police. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but not particularly hopeful. Without knowing who sent the messages, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in my neighborhood. They suggested I get better locks, close my curtains fully, maybe install a security system. Standard advice that didn't make me feel any safer. The photos kept coming. Different angles, different nights. Sometimes the messages would say things like "sweet dreams" or "you should lock your windows better." Each one felt more violating than the last. Whoever this was, they were watching me regularly. They knew my routine. They knew when I went to bed. They had access to my property, to my private space, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every sound outside became a potential threat. I'd lie awake for hours staring at my curtains, wondering if someone was out there right now. I installed cameras around my house, upgraded all my locks, bought blackout curtains that completely blocked the windows, but the psychological damage was already done. I felt hunted in my own home. The police traced the phone number to a burner phone, purchased with cash. Dead end. They checked for fingerprints on my windowsills. Nothing useful. I felt completely helpless, just waiting for the next message, the next proof that someone was violating my privacy whenever they felt like it. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. In one of the photos, there was a reflection in my bedroom mirror. It was tiny, barely noticeable, but when I zoomed in on my phone, I could make out details. A yard, some plants, and a very distinctive garden gnome wearing a small fishing hat and holding a tiny fishing rod. I knew that gnome. Only one person in the neighborhood had that exact gnome. Tom, my next-door neighbor. Tom was this friendly retired guy in his mid-60s who'd lived on the street for decades. When I'd moved in 2 years ago, he'd been one of the first to introduce himself, brought over cookies his wife had made, offered to help if I ever needed anything. After his wife passed away a year ago, he'd gotten even more attentive, always asking if I was okay living alone, if I felt safe, if I needed him to check on anything. I'd thought he was just being a concerned neighbor, maybe a little lonely after losing his wife. Now I was looking at evidence that he'd been stalking me. I felt sick. This man I'd smiled at, made small talk with, trusted to water my plants when I went out of town. He'd been standing outside my bedroom window taking photos of me while I slept, but I needed to be sure, and I needed evidence the police could actually use. So I set a trap. I staged my bedroom to look like I was asleep. Pillows under the blankets, shaped like a body. Lamp off, everything looking normal from outside. But I wasn't in the bed. I was sitting in my living room with all the lights off, watching the feed from the cameras I'd positioned around my house, recording everything. It took 3 nights of sitting in the dark, watching screens, waiting. I was starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't Tom. Maybe the gnome was just a coincidence. Then on the third night, at 1:47 in the morning, I saw movement on the camera pointed at my bedroom window. It was Tom, standing in my yard in dark clothing, holding his phone up to my window, taking photos of what he thought was me sleeping. I watched him do it, bile rising in my throat. He spent maybe 2 minutes there, taking multiple shots from different angles, then carefully made his way back to his own yard. I called the police immediately, sent them the video footage. They arrived within 10 minutes and went directly to Tom's house. What happened next, nobody saw it coming. When they searched Tom's house, they found thousands of photos, not just of me, but of 2 other women in the neighborhood. Both lived alone. Both were younger. The photos went back years, organized in folders on his computer by date and by person. Photos of us sleeping, showering through bathroom windows, changing clothes, eating dinner. Every private moment we thought we had, he'd been documenting. They found journals where he'd written about us, tracking our schedules, our visitors, our routines. He'd noted when we went on dates, when we had friends over, when we were home alone. It was obsessive and detailed and absolutely horrifying. Tom had been doing this for at least 5 years. His wife had probably never known, or maybe she had and couldn't stop him. The police said some of the photos predated her death, which meant he'd been stalking women while she was alive, while she was dying of cancer in their house. He was arrested that night, charged with stalking, harassment, criminal trespass, invasion of privacy. The evidence was overwhelming. His lawyer tried to argue he was just a lonely old man who'd made poor decisions after his wife's death. But the timestamps on thousands of photos proved this had been going on long before she died. The trial was brutal. I had to testify, had to see those photos presented as evidence, had to sit in the same room as Tom while lawyers discussed my bedroom, my habits, my body. The other 2 victims testified too. We'd never known about each other, never realized we were all being watched by the same person. Tom is in prison now, sentenced to 8 years. He'll be in his 70s when he gets out, if he makes it that long. Part of me hopes he doesn't. I moved 3 months after the trial. Couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every time I looked at Tom's property, I felt sick. Even with him gone, even with new neighbors moving in, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced someone was outside my window. My new place is a 2nd-floor apartment in a building with security. No ground-level windows, no yard access. I still have cameras everywhere. I still check all the locks multiple times before bed. I still struggle to sleep most nights. The worst part is how safe I'd felt before, how normal everything had seemed. Tom was just the nice neighbor, the friendly old guy who cared about the community. I'd trusted him. I'd given him my spare key once when I locked myself out. He'd been in my house, alone, while I was at work. I don't even want to think about what he might have done. People ask me sometimes if I'm okay now. The answer is complicated. Physically, I'm safe. Tom's locked up, I'm in a secure building, I have therapy twice a week. But mentally, I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from knowing that for 2 years, someone was watching me in my most vulnerable moments, and I had no idea. The violation isn't just about the photos, it's about the loss of trust, the constant paranoia, the knowledge that privacy is more fragile than I ever realized. It's about lying in bed at night, in a locked apartment on the 2nd floor, and still feeling exposed. The other victims and I have stayed in touch. We have a group chat where we check in on each other, share coping strategies, remind each other that what happened wasn't our fault. They're the only people who really understand what this feels like. One of them told me that the hardest part for her was realizing how much of her life Tom had stolen. Not just the privacy, but the peace of mind, the ability to feel safe in her own space. I told her I understood completely, because that's what stalkers do. They don't just invade your space, they take away your sense of control, your ability to trust your own perception of safety. Even after they're caught, even after they're locked away, the damage remains. I still struggle with feeling safe. I probably always will, But at least Tom's not out there doing this to anyone else. At least those photos are destroyed, the evidence sealed, the threat neutralized. It's not enough. It'll never be enough to undo what he did. But it's something. And speaking of private invasions, sometimes the attack comes from someone you actually trusted. My best friend Rachel was building an influencer career. Lifestyle content, inspirational posts, the whole aesthetic Instagram thing, with perfect lighting and carefully curated captions. I supported her completely from the start, helped her brainstorm content ideas, appeared in her vlogs when she needed someone on camera, hyped up her posts, shared my life with her because that's what best friends do. Her following grew steadily, started with a few hundred followers, then a few thousand, then tens of thousands. Within 2 years, she hit 300,000 followers. She was landing brand deals, getting sent free products, making actual money from sponsorships. I was genuinely happy for her, watched her success grow, and felt proud that my best friend was making her dreams happen. Then I started noticing things, little details in her posts that felt familiar. A story she told about struggling with anxiety that sounded a lot like a conversation we'd had when I was going through a rough patch. A post about dealing with a toxic family member that used specific phrases I'd said to her during a vent session about my uncle. At first, I brushed it off. We were close. We influenced each other. Maybe I was being oversensitive about some overlapping experiences. Best friends share everything, right? It's natural that our stories would blend together sometimes. But then it got more specific. Rachel posted a reel that went viral. Funny story about getting drunk at a wedding and accidentally telling the bride's grandmother explicit details about her dating life. Got like 2 million views, thousands of comments about how relatable and hilarious she was. Except that story was mine, down to specific details. The grandmother's shocked face, the exact phrase I'd drunkenly said, the way I'd hidden in the bathroom afterward, dying of embarrassment. I'd told Rachel that story years ago, made her swear never to repeat it because I was mortified. And there it was, repackaged as her content, going viral while strangers laughed at my humiliation, without knowing it was actually me. I called her about it, tried to be casual, said, "Hey, that wedding story sounds familiar." She laughed it off, said all wedding drunk stories are kind of the same. Didn't I think it was funny how well it performed? I let it go because confronting your best friend about potentially stealing your stories feels insane, like accusing them of something so petty and paranoid that bringing it up makes you the problem. But I started paying closer attention to her content, and that's when I realized she'd been doing this for months. My struggles became her relatable content. My experiences became her viral moments. My life was being repackaged and sold to her followers as her authentic journey. Then came the breaking point. I had a miscarriage last year. It was devastating, one of the worst experiences of my life. I'd been 12 weeks along, had started letting myself get excited, picked out baby names with my husband, imagined our future, and then it was just gone. I told Rachel everything, sobbed on her couch for hours, shared all the painful, intimate details, how scared I'd been at the hospital, how empty I felt afterward, the things the doctor said, how my husband and I were struggling to process the grief together. She held me while I cried, told me she was there for me, that I could tell her anything. 2 weeks later, she posted about her emotional journey through pregnancy loss. Not my miscarriage exactly. She changed some details, made it her sister's loss that she was supporting through, positioned herself as the loving sister helping a family member grieve. But the details were mine. The hospital experience, the specific feelings, even some of the exact phrases I'd used to describe the emptiness. She got thousands of supportive comments, people praising her vulnerability, her strength, her beautiful way of expressing grief. Brands reached out to partner with her on maternal health content, and I sat there reading it, feeling physically sick, watching strangers comment on my trauma without knowing it was mine. She'd taken the worst experience of my life and turned it into engagement content. I confronted her immediately, called her crying and angry, asked her what the hell she was thinking, how she could possibly use my miscarriage for Instagram content. She got defensive, said I was overreacting, that the post wasn't about me, it was about her sister. When I pointed out that her sister had never been pregnant, she changed tactics, said I was jealous of her success, that I couldn't handle her growing platform, that I wanted to tear her down because my own life wasn't as interesting. Jealous. She actually said I was jealous that she'd monetize my miscarriage. I told her she needed to take the post down and stop using my life for content. She refused, said the post was performing really well, she had brand partnerships developing from it. Taking it down would damage her engagement metrics. I gave her one warning, told her if she didn't stop, I'd expose what she'd been doing. She laughed, said I had no proof, that even if I did, her followers loved her and wouldn't believe some bitter friend trying to start drama. So I got proof. I spent 2 weeks putting together a comprehensive video, side-by-side comparisons of her posts with my dated text messages and photos proving the stories were actually mine, screenshots of conversations where I'd told her these things in confidence, time-stamped before her posts went live. The wedding story, I had texts from 3 years ago telling her about it, photos from the actual wedding showing me in the outfit she'd described herself wearing in the reel. The anxiety content, message threads where I'd opened up about my struggles, using the same specific language that appeared in her inspirational posts months later. The miscarriage post, hospital paperwork with dates, messages to Rachel from that time period, sharing those exact details, proof that her sister had never been pregnant. I laid it all out clearly and calmly. Didn't yell or get emotional, just presented the evidence, showed exactly how she'd been stealing my life experiences and selling them as her own authentic content for 2 years. I posted it everywhere, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Tagged her in everything, made sure her followers would see it. The response was immediate and brutal. Her comment sections exploded. Followers who'd loved her relatability and authenticity felt betrayed. They'd connected with her content because they thought it was real, thought they were supporting someone genuine. Finding out she'd been plagiarizing her best friend's trauma for engagement destroyed that parasocial relationship. People started going through her old posts, identifying other stories that seemed suspicious, speculating about what else she'd stolen. The algorithm turned against her as engagement shifted from supportive to accusatory. Brand deals evaporated within 48 hours. Companies don't want to partner with influencers caught in scandal, especially one that makes them look dishonest and exploitative. The maternal health brand that had reached out after the miscarriage post publicly cut ties, released a statement about supporting authentic voices. She lost 200,000 followers in a week. Her perfectly curated influencer career imploded in real time while I watched from the outside. Rachel tried damage control. Posted a tearful apology video claiming she'd made mistakes, that she'd gotten caught up in the pressure to create content, that she never meant to hurt anyone. Her remaining followers weren't buying it. The comments were ruthless, calling out how manipulative the apology seemed, how she was only sorry she got caught. She texted me privately. Long messages about how sorry she was, how she'd been wrong, how the pressure of maintaining her platform had made her lose sight of what mattered. Asked if we could talk, if there was any way to fix our friendship. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd used my miscarriage for Instagram engagement. There's no coming back from that. Her influencer career never recovered. She still has her accounts, still posts occasionally, but the following is down to maybe 70,000 and dropping. No brand deals, no sponsorships, just someone who used to be successful posting into the void. Mutual friends have told me I went too far, that I destroyed her career over some Instagram posts, that I should have handled it privately instead of publicly humiliating her. They act like I'm the villain for exposing what she did instead of her being the villain for doing it. But I don't regret it. Not even a little bit. She built her entire platform on stolen authenticity, on exploiting my trust and packaging my pain as her relatable content. She monetized my trauma after I explicitly asked her to stop, and when I called her out, she said I was jealous, so I showed her followers who she really was. Let them make their own decisions about whether they wanted to support someone who'd do that to their supposed best friend. The career she built on my life experiences collapsed when people learned the truth. That's not revenge, that's just consequences. I still think about those comments sometimes, strangers offering Rachel support and admiration for processing my miscarriage, praising her vulnerability for sharing my pain. She took something devastating and private and turned it into content while I was still grieving, and she expected me to just let it go because we were friends. Some friendships don't survive betrayal, and some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. But sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from a friend stealing your stories. It comes from someone stealing you. I discovered someone was using my photos, my name, and my life details to catfish people on dating apps and social media. Not just one profile, multiple. Friends started sending me screenshots asking if I was okay, if I'd created new accounts, why I was on Tinder when I'd been in a relationship for 3 years. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone who looked similar to me, some weird coincidence. But the profiles were using my actual photos, pictures from my Instagram, my Facebook, even some older photos from my college days that I'd posted years ago. My face, my name, details about my life that were just close enough to reality to be convincing. I reported every account I found, sent messages to the platforms explaining that someone was impersonating me, using my photos without permission. Most of the accounts got taken down within a few days. I thought that was the end of it, but new ones kept appearing. Different platforms, slightly different names, but always my photos. Sometimes they'd use my real first name with a fake last name. Sometimes they'd switch it around. The photos were always mine though, pulled from various social media accounts I'd had over the years. Then someone they'd scammed contacted me directly. A guy named Marcus found my real Facebook profile and sent me a long message. He'd been talking to someone he thought was me for 3 months. They'd met on a dating app, hit it off, had these long emotional conversations. She'd told him she was going through a rough time financially, that her car had broken down and she couldn't afford repairs. He'd sent her money, $5,000 over the course of 2 months. Then she'd asked for more and he'd gotten suspicious. Started reverse image searching the photos she'd sent, found my real profile. Realized he'd been talking to someone pretending to be me. I felt horrible reading his message. This wasn't just someone using my photos for attention. They were actively scamming people, manipulating them emotionally and financially while wearing my face. Marcus wasn't the only one. Once I started digging, I found other victims, people who'd been in relationships with fake me, sent gifts, money, emotional support to someone who didn't exist. All of them thought they'd been dating me, based on stolen photos and fabricated stories. And here's where it gets absurd. I started investigating deeper, trying to figure out who was behind this. Created fake accounts to track the catfish profiles, documented patterns in their behavior, catalogued which photos they used and when. I wasn't just dealing with one person stealing my identity. This was organized. The profiles all followed similar patterns, same writing style, same types of sob stories, same manipulation tactics. They'd build emotional connections quickly, establish trust, then introduce financial problems that required help. The amounts varied, small requests at first to test the waters, then larger sums once the victim was invested. I connected with other victims through Marcus. He'd found a few people in online forums who'd been scammed by similar profiles. We started comparing notes, sharing information about the accounts that had targeted us. That's when we realized the scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just about me. There were dozens of stolen identities being used. Young women mostly, photos pulled from social media, turned into fake personas for catfishing operations. My case was just one of many. We discovered the operation was being run by 3 people working together from another country, using VPNs to hide their locations and cycling through stolen identities systematically. When one identity got reported too many times, they'd switch to another. They had whole libraries of stolen photos, fake backstories, scripts for different scenarios. It was a full-scale fraud operation, and I'd accidentally stumbled into the middle of it by being one of their identity theft victims. I gathered everything I'd compiled, screenshots of the fake profiles, conversations victims had saved, financial transaction records showing money transfers, patterns connecting the different accounts, evidence of the coordinated nature of the scam. Organized it all into a comprehensive document that laid out exactly what was happening. Then I contacted the FBI's Internet Crime Division, filed a formal complaint through their IC3 system, included all the evidence, connected them with the other victims who were willing to participate in an investigation. This wasn't just identity theft anymore, it was wire fraud, potentially involving victims across multiple states and countries. The FBI actually took it seriously. An agent contacted me within 2 weeks, asked for additional information, started interviewing the victims we'd identified. They brought in international law enforcement because the perpetrators were operating from overseas. But that wasn't even the worst part. While the investigation was ongoing, the catfishers realized someone was tracking them. The profiles using my photos suddenly went dark. I thought maybe they'd given up, moved on to other identities. Instead, they pivoted to harassment, started creating profiles that posted my real information publicly. My address, my workplace, my phone number. Created fake reviews for my employer claiming I'd stolen from customers. Posted on local community pages saying I was a scammer. Warning people about me using screenshots of conversations their fake profiles had had with victims. They were trying to destroy my real reputation to discredit any investigation, make it look like I was the scammer trying to cover my tracks by blaming non-existent catfishers. My phone started ringing constantly, strangers calling to yell at me about money I'd supposedly taken. My employer got complaints. My boyfriend's family saw posts claiming I was cheating on him with multiple people. It was a nightmare. I documented all of it. Every fake post, every harassing message, every attempt to frame me as the criminal. Sent it all to the FBI agent handling the case. Showed them exactly how the scammers were escalating in response to the investigation. That evidence apparently helped. Showed the organized and malicious nature of the operation. Proved they were actively trying to obstruct justice by targeting me. The international investigation took 8 months, but eventually law enforcement tracked down the people running the operation. 3 individuals working together from Eastern Europe, running multiple catfishing schemes simultaneously. They'd stolen hundreds of identities, scammed victims out of over $1 million collectively. Multiple arrests were made. I don't know all the details because international law enforcement doesn't share everything with victims, but the FBI agent told me the operation had been dismantled. The people responsible were facing charges in their home country and potentially extradition for crimes against US victims. I helped other victims file reports, connected them with the investigation, provided character references confirming they'd been scammed and weren't complicit. A lot of them had been embarrassed to come forward, felt stupid for falling for it. I tried to help them understand they'd been targeted by professionals running a sophisticated operation. The profiles using my photos finally stopped appearing. The harassment posts got taken down. My name slowly stopped being associated with scams when you Googled it. But I still check monthly. Search my name, reverse image search my photos, look for any signs that someone's using my identity again. It's become this paranoid habit I can't break. Every time I post a photo online, I wonder if it's going to end up on a fake dating profile somewhere. The whole experience made me realize how vulnerable we all are. We put our lives online, share photos and details freely, assume the worst that can happen is some embarrassing tagged photos. We don't think about someone stealing our entire identity, using our face to manipulate strangers, destroying lives while wearing our name. Marcus still emails me occasionally, updates about his recovery from the financial loss, how he's learned to be more careful online. Some of the other victims have reached out over the years too. We have this weird shared trauma of having our trust exploited by people pretending to be me. The FBI agent said cases like this are becoming more common. Organized catfishing rings, identity theft for fraud purposes, international operations that are hard to track and prosecute. Most victims never figure out who's behind it. I got lucky that I was stubborn enough to investigate and found other victims willing to help. I still feel guilty sometimes, guilty that my photos were used to hurt people. Logically, I know it wasn't my fault, that I was a victim too. But when I think about Marcus sending $5,000 to someone he thought was me, about all the other people who got emotionally manipulated by fake me, it's hard not to feel responsible somehow. The operation got dismantled, but the damage was done. People lost money, trust, emotional well-being, and somewhere out there, other catfishing rings are still running, using other stolen identities, targeting new victims. At least mine mostly ended. The profiles are gone, the harassment stopped. My name isn't associated with scams anymore. I get to reclaim my identity and my life, but I'll never feel completely safe online again. And I'll definitely never stop checking to make sure nobody's pretending to be me. And while we're talking about people destroying reputations, let me tell you about someone who tried to destroy mine locally. Greg lived 3 houses down and seemed to hate that I was a single woman who didn't need his help. From the moment I moved into the neighborhood, he was there, offering to mow my lawn, fix my fence, check my gutters, install security lights. At first, I thought he was just being neighborly, but there was something off about the way he'd linger, the way he'd show up uninvited, the way he'd get this tight expression when I'd politely tell him I had it handled. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of my own house. I grew up with a dad who taught me basic home maintenance, and anything beyond that, I could hire a professional or YouTube my way through. I didn't need Greg's help, and I definitely didn't need him treating me like some helpless damsel who couldn't change a light bulb without a man's supervision. After about the fifth time I declined his offers, something shifted. He stopped being friendly, started being cold, would glare at me when I'd pull into my driveway, made pointed comments about how some people were too proud to accept help from their neighbors. I figured he was just bruised ego, and I ignored it. Then the rumors started. It began subtly. A neighbor I'd been friendly with suddenly got weird when I said hello. Another crossed the street to avoid talking to me. I noticed people whispering when I walked past during the weekly neighborhood yard sales. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but then my next-door neighbor, Diane, pulled me aside one evening. She asked me very carefully if everything was okay, if I was in some kind of trouble. When I asked what she meant, she hesitated, then told me there were rumors going around. Bad ones. People were saying I was running a prostitution ring out of my house, that strange men were coming and going at all hours, that I was involved in drug dealing, that I abused my 2 cats. I stood there completely stunned. None of it was remotely true. The men coming and going were probably the pest control guy, the HVAC technician, and my brother who visited regularly. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. My cats were spoiled rotten and had better healthcare than most humans. The accusations were absurd, but the damage was already done. I was removed from the neighborhood Facebook group without explanation. People stopped waving when I drove past. Someone keyed my car while it was parked in my own driveway. I'd get nasty looks at the grocery store from neighbors I'd never even spoken to. One woman actually pulled her child away from me at the park, like I was some kind of predator. I was devastated. I'd moved to this neighborhood specifically because it seemed friendly and tight-knit. I'd imagined becoming part of the community, hosting barbecues, knowing my neighbors. Instead, I was being treated like a pariah based on lies I couldn't even trace back to a source. I tried defending myself to anyone who'd listen, but that just made me look desperate. People had already made up their minds. In their eyes, I was guilty, and my denials just confirmed it. Then I decided to stop playing defense and start gathering evidence. I installed a complete camera system around my property. Front door, back door, driveway, garage, all angles covered. If someone was vandalizing my property or doing something to fuel these rumors, I'd catch them. I also started documenting everything, keeping a log of incidents, screenshots of any online comments I could find, dates and times of when neighbors confronted me or avoided me. 2 weeks after installing the cameras, I caught Greg. It was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed with a motion alert from the garage camera. I pulled up the feed and watched in real time as Greg, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap, spray-painted the word whore across my garage door in huge red letters. He took his time with it, making sure the letters were neat and visible. Then he stepped back, admired his work, and walked calmly back toward his house. I saved the footage immediately, made multiple backups, and called the police. They came out, took a report, watched the video. Greg was charged with vandalism and criminal mischief. But I wasn't done, because I'd started digging into where these rumors were actually coming from, and I'd found something interesting. There were multiple fake social media accounts spreading these stories about me. Accounts with generic names and stock photos, all created around the same time, all posting in local community groups about the suspicious single woman on Maple Street. Some posts claimed they'd seen drug deals happening at my house. Others said they'd witnessed me screaming at my cats. One detailed account described seeing multiple men entering and leaving at odd hours. All lies, all posted by accounts that, when I dug into the metadata and cross-referenced posting times and IP information with help from a tech-savvy friend, all traced back to the same location. Greg's house. He'd created an entire network of fake personas to destroy my reputation. He'd spent months doing this, posting regularly, commenting on his own posts from different accounts to make it look like multiple people were concerned. He'd built a narrative that I was dangerous, immoral, untrustworthy, and the neighborhood had bought it completely. And here's where it gets absurd. I kept digging and found that I wasn't his first target. There was a woman who'd lived in my house before me. She'd left after only a year, and when I tracked her down through public records and reached out, she told me a similar story. Greg had harassed her, spread rumors about her being unstable and promiscuous, made her life hell until she finally moved away just to escape it. She'd never reported it because she just wanted to move on with her life. There was also a single mother 2 streets over who Greg had targeted years ago. She'd eventually married and her husband had confronted Greg, which apparently made him back off, but the pattern was clear. Greg had a thing about single women in the neighborhood, and when they didn't welcome his attention, he systematically destroyed them. I compiled everything: the video of him vandalizing my garage, screenshots of all the fake accounts with metadata showing they originated from his IP address, testimony from the previous victim willing to go on record, documentation of the harassment campaign, a timeline showing how the rumors started immediately after I rejected his help, even testimonies from a few neighbors he'd also harassed over the years for various perceived slights. The neighborhood had a monthly association meeting. I'd never attended before because I'd been excluded from most community activities, but these meetings were technically open to all residents, so I showed up. Greg was there, of course, sitting in the front row, probably feeling pretty confident. He'd successfully run off at least one woman before me. He probably thought I'd just leave quietly like she had. When they opened the floor for community concerns, I stood up. I thanked everyone for their time and said I wanted to address some serious issues affecting the neighborhood. Then I started presenting my evidence. I showed the video of Greg spray painting my garage. Gasps went through the room. I showed screenshots of the fake social media accounts, explained how they'd all been created by the same person to spread lies about me. I presented the testimony from Greg's previous victim. I laid out the entire harassment campaign in detail, with dates, evidence, and proof. Greg's face went from smug to pale to bright red. He tried to interrupt, claimed I was making it all up, that this was defamation. But I had everything backed up, everything documented. The association president asked him directly if he'd spray painted my garage. Greg stammered, tried to deny it, but the video was clear as day. Other neighbors started speaking up. Turns out Greg had been a problem for years. He'd spread rumors about other people too, just never as systematically. He'd filed frivolous complaints about fence heights and lawn care. He'd harassed the teenagers who walked past his house. Multiple people had stories about Greg being controlling, aggressive, and inappropriate, but everyone had just tolerated it because confronting him seemed like more trouble than it was worth. The association voted unanimously to issue a formal warning. They also voted to support me in filing a restraining order, which I did. The police investigation into the fake accounts led to additional charges for cyberstalking and harassment. Greg's reputation, the one thing he'd tried so hard to destroy mine to protect, was completely shattered. People who'd believed his lies about me now saw him for what he really was: a bitter, obsessive man who couldn't handle rejection and would rather destroy someone's life than accept that not everyone wanted his attention. He moved away 6 months later, just put his house up for sale and left. I heard through Diane that he couldn't handle being the neighborhood pariah, couldn't stand people crossing the street to avoid him the way they'd done to me. My reputation was slowly rebuilt after that. It took time. Some people apologized directly. Others just started being friendly again without acknowledging they'd ever treated me badly. I was re-added to the Facebook group. People waved again. I even hosted a small barbecue that summer, and several neighbors showed up. But the trust was damaged. I never fully felt the same way about that neighborhood. Too many people had been willing to believe the worst about me based on anonymous rumors. Too many had participated in the shunning without ever asking for my side of the story. Greg was the one who'd orchestrated it, but the community had enabled it. I still live there. My house is paid off and I like the location. But I keep to myself more now. Polite but distant. I learned that tight-knit communities can be wonderful when you're accepted, but absolutely brutal when someone decides you're not. Greg thought he could run me out like he'd done to others, thought he could control who belonged in the neighborhood and who didn't. Instead, he just proved that giving someone enough rope and documenting everything is sometimes the best revenge. He destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone was watching when he did it. Of course, not everyone who helps you is secretly planning to replace you, except when they are. When Maya started as a junior developer at our company, she was completely overwhelmed. First day, I watched her stare at her computer screen like it was displaying alien hieroglyphics. Our manager, knowing I had the patience and experience, paired us together. He asked me to show her the ropes, help her get up to speed, make sure she didn't drown in the deep end. I didn't mind. I remembered being new and lost. Remembered how much easier those early months were because someone took the time to help me. So I spent months mentoring Maya. I walked her through our entire code base, explaining not just what the code did, but why we'd built it that way. I introduced her to our clients, taught her how to handle their sometimes unreasonable requests diplomatically. I shared every shortcut I'd learned the hard way over 5 years, every strategy that made our jobs easier, every trick for debugging the particularly nightmarish legacy systems we maintained. Maya was the perfect student, always grateful, always engaged, always asking smart questions. She'd bring me coffee in the mornings, thank me constantly for my help, tell me how much she appreciated having such a good mentor. I genuinely liked her. We'd grab lunch together, joke around during breaks, celebrate when we finally cracked particularly difficult problems. I thought we were building a real friendship alongside the professional relationship. She got good fast. Within 6 months, she was handling tasks independently that would have taken most junior devs a year to manage. I was proud of her progress, felt like I'd done my job well as a mentor. Our manager was impressed too, kept commenting on how quickly she'd adapted, how valuable she was becoming to the team. Then our senior developer, Greg, announced his retirement. He'd been with the company for 15 years, was basically the institutional knowledge holder for half our systems. His departure created an opening I'd been working toward for 5 years. The senior developer position. Better pay, more interesting projects. The kind of role where you actually got to make architectural decisions instead of just implementing them. I applied confidently. I had the experience, the track record, the relationships with clients. I'd been unofficially doing senior level work for the past year anyway, covering for Greg when he was out, making critical decisions on projects. This felt like a natural progression, the logical next step in my career at the company. The interview process was more formal than I expected. Multiple rounds, technical assessments, presentations to leadership. I prepared thoroughly, reviewed my best projects, practiced answers to common interview questions. I felt good going in, but during the final interview, they asked questions I'd never anticipated. Specific, detailed questions about systems that only Maya and I had worked on together. Questions about optimization strategies I'd developed but hadn't formally documented. Questions about client relationship management techniques I'd shared with Maya during our mentoring sessions, but had never discussed with management. I answered as best I could, but something felt off. The questions were too specific, too targeted to the exact knowledge I'd been transferring to Maya. It felt less like they were testing my knowledge and more like they were confirming something they already knew. A week later, I got the rejection email. They'd decided to go with someone who better embodied the future direction of the team, someone with fresh perspectives and innovative approaches. I was confused and hurt but tried to take it professionally. These things happen. Maybe they wanted someone with different skills. Then I found out Maya had gotten the promotion. Maya, the junior developer I'd spent 6 months training, the person who'd learned everything she knew about our systems from me. She'd somehow leapfrogged over me for a senior position. I congratulated her because that's what you do, but inside I was reeling. How had this happened? She'd been with the company less than a year. I had 5 years of experience, a proven track record, relationships she hadn't even begun to build yet. And here's where it gets absurd. Over the next few weeks, pieces started falling into place. Maya had been meeting secretly with management for months. I found out from another coworker who'd seen them having coffee before work hours, noticed her staying late for conversations with our director. She'd been positioning herself strategically, framing herself as the future of the department while subtly undermining my contributions. She'd taken everything I taught her and used it as evidence of her own capabilities, while simultaneously suggesting that I was stuck in old patterns, resistant to change, more of a maintainer than an innovator. She'd presented my optimization strategies as her own ideas during those secret meetings. She'd taken credit for solutions we'd developed together. She'd essentially built her promotion case by mining my knowledge and then positioning herself as the superior version of me. The coffee she'd brought me every morning, the grateful thank yous, the friendly lunches, all of it was just strategy. She'd been studying me, learning from me, and planning to replace me the entire time. I felt like an idiot. I'd handed her everything she needed to take the job I'd been working toward for years. I'd literally trained my own replacement and been too naive to see it happening. The worst part was watching her struggle after she got the promotion. Turns out knowing how to do something when someone's teaching you is very different from actually being able to do it independently under pressure. Maya had learned the what and the how from me, but she'd never developed the why, the deeper understanding that comes from years of experience and mistakes. Within weeks, she was overwhelmed. Projects started running late. Clients began complaining. She'd make decisions that looked good on the surface but created massive technical debt down the road. And because she'd positioned herself as this innovative future leader, she couldn't ask for help without admitting she wasn't as capable as she'd claimed to be. I watched it happen with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because karma was clearly working. Sadness because the team was suffering, projects were failing, and clients were unhappy. Her failure wasn't happening in a vacuum, it was affecting everyone. I started job hunting 3 months after she got promoted. I couldn't stay in a place that had valued manipulation over merit, that had rewarded someone for betraying the person who'd helped them. I found a better position at a competitor, better pay, better culture, actual opportunities for advancement based on performance rather than politics. My exit interview was professional but pointed. I explained exactly what had happened, how Maya had used mentorship as a weapon, how the company's decision-making process had rewarded deception. I don't know if it made any difference, but I needed to say it. Maya was let go about a year after I left. I heard through former co-workers that she'd never managed to get her feet under her, that the technical debt she'd created had become unmanageable, that clients had specifically requested not to work with her anymore. The company eventually brought in someone with actual senior-level experience to clean up the mess. Part of me felt vindicated. The person who'd betrayed me had failed spectacularly. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of workplace politics. Tired of people who saw mentorship as an opportunity for exploitation. Tired of companies that couldn't tell the difference between actual competence and good self-promotion. The experience changed how I approach mentorship now. I'm more careful, more guarded. I still help people when they're genuinely struggling, but I document my contributions. I'm strategic about what knowledge I